Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto and Hinata have been stuck in a special time loop for multiple lifetimes. Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. The sounds of battle had faded away long ago. Together they sat back to back on top of a mountain of corpses. The smell of blood and the elements had mingled together into a smell that was either good or bad. It was almost as if part of nature itself. By then, it most likely was. Something that they could never lose within their lives any longer. Both blondes gave heavy sighs, their long hair all but tangled with each other's. Though hers sprawled out around them near the bottom, his stopped just past his shoulders. They took time to let their breaths even out, not moving or speaking to one another. Their eyes gazed out in opposite directions, taking in the large wasteland covered in bodies and blood. The rivers around them were as scarlet as everything else. The sound of footsteps climbing over bodies drew their attention to their side. A woman with long and deep indigo hair trudged slowly to the top of the corpse hill. Arrows and kunai stuck from numerous parts of her body, one of her eyes being shut. The way a large amount of blood sat under the eye, the two blondes knew the woman had lost it. Blood sat at the corner of her mouth as well, the eternal bleeding she was experiencing evident. As the woman made it before the two, she tottered. Her one remaining eye was unfocused. As she began to fall forward, the two blondes moved to sit next to each other and caught the woman together. It was shown that the two blondes also had several blades sticking out of their torsos as well, but neither seemed as bad as the woman before them. At least, not on the outside. We failed again, the dark-haired woman whispered, her voice barely coming out. She choked back blood that threatened to rise from her throat. The two blondes held her gently, hugging her with a warmth that pushed away at the cold of death that was gripping her. She could feel the same air about the two as well. The blonde-haired woman nodded slightly, the movement sending jolts of pain through her body. Yep, but we were close this time. Not close enough. The male blonde finally spoke as he gently stroked the dark-haired woman's back. We won't be able to try again for a long time. He coughed, finally showing that his wounds were indeed affecting him as well. The trio fell into a silence as they knew what was coming. The breaths of the woman between them slowly began to fade. Before the last of her life ebbed away, she placed a chaste kiss onto the lips of both of the blondes that held her. "I'll see you guys soon," she whispered before shutting her single eye shut for good. As the two blondes held their deceased lover, they shed silent tears. Though they both had solemn smiles on their faces, this part always got to them. Naruto-kun, the blonde female, whispered her counterpart's name. "Yes, Inohime?" The male responded. "Let's fuck everything up next time," she called before her eyes drifted shut as well. "You know it." He called and moved to cradle both girls' bodies. It would be a while longer before he could join them. So instead, he would hold them and revel in their fading warmth until the cold hand of death was ready to accept him again as well. He awoke to a familiar dark and dirty ceiling. The sound of a ceiling fan clicking on bad screws made him sigh in contentment. "At least I'm back in my apartment, and not in the middle of a battle this time." The blonde called to no one in particular. He sat up and felt the nightcap on his head. Looking around at his horribly messy room let him know he was back to when he was a genin. Or perhaps, it was even before then. Only one way to find out, he mumbled and stood up. The whiskered boy stretched and yawned, feeling as if he had just awoken from a century-long nap. Though it wasn't really too far from the truth, he didn't understand the workings of time after each time he and his ladies died. He moved to his tiny living room and sat down in a meditative position. The memories of his past lives were there, but he needed information on his current situation. The chakra he channeled into his center and brain began to collect energy from around him as well. Soon enough, the memories of this current life began to rush into him. "How far back are we?" The booming voice of his literal inner demon echoed out with a yawn. It seemed Kurama had just recently awoken as well, figuring it out now. Naruto echoed back within his mind. The QB groaned. "Well, hurry it up. I need to know if I should start altering your body," he called with another yawn. Naruto scoffed at the demon. "How can you be so impatient when we have all the time in the world? Because unlike you, I'm trapped in a cage still. The sooner you can let me out, the better." Kurama rolled his eyes. They did this every time. For as long as either one of them could remember, they had been forced to relive their lives over and over again. Neither remembered exactly when or why it started. All they did remember that it was only Naruto at first. Then after a while of getting used to the happenings of history, with the few changes that occurred each time, Ino Yamanaka began to experience the repeats as well. Soon after, Hinata Hyuga joined them, and so for the past few millennia, the trio had been forced into a temporal time loop. In the beginning, they all figured it was something they needed to do to stop the time loops. Maybe some villain they didn't stop in time, or some actions that needed to be corrected in their lives. However, after several times of saving the shinobi nations and living peaceful lives into their old ages, the trio soon realized they were simply doomed to a sort of purgatory for all eternity. Of course, they had given in to despair at some points. They committed suicide on multiple occasions, blamed and killed each other, and sometimes just went off the deep end. None of them were sane in any sense of the word anymore. At least, not for one where mortality actually meant something. Soon they felt content with the repetitions and even began to enjoy them, until a real threat appeared. They noticed that this threat did not exist within every loop they went through. Actually, the being only existed occasionally, probably every 1,000 years or so. It had no definite form or shape from what they could tell. Even the tailed beast had said it was something far beyond their knowledge. The one time the trio had even gotten Madara, Obito, and even Kagura on their side, none knew of the being. And it had soundly defeated them with almost no effort. The being was an all-out force. When it wouldn't personally send the trio back into looping oblivion, it fucked enough of the world up to do it for them. The trio began to understand, to some degree, that whatever was causing them to loop was probably connected to the entity. They simply called the being chaos. Snapping back to his present reality, Naruto's eyes opened. He smirked a bit as the memories of that timeline finally settled within his psyche. Alright, so the villagers hate me more than ever here. They've beat me in this timeline, a rarity if I do say so myself, and several have tried to kill me on multiple occasions. Hokageji loves me in this one and has dealt out capital punishment on several of the people he caught fucking with me. What part of time are we in? Beginning the last year of the academy. Ino and Hinata seem to be the same as most often. I'm a lot more introverted because of the beatings, and I don't go out of my way to be conspicuous. Sasuke's a super prick in this one. It's a shame. I like having him as a best friend sometimes. Naruto shrugged as he began to head to wash up and meet with his two lovers. After the first few thousand times he had killed Sasuke, it had gotten a bit boring. Seeing different ways he could change the self-proclaimed Avenger had become a fun pastime for him. But in this timeline, it seemed as if Sasuke was a super ego fuck stick that would probably end up dead during the mission to Wave. So how are you going to play it this time? Kurama's curious gaze tickled Naruto's mind. He knew this was one of the fox's favorite parts. Next to being released from his confinement. And also being a girl. For some reason, Kurama loved being a female in some timelines, like Inoheim requested. We're going to fuck shit up. We've probably got another 1,000 years before chaos shows up again, so we're going to cause some chaos of our own. That's all I needed to hear. The fox laughed as it began to repair Naruto's body back to its prime physical condition before his previous death. The assaulting smell of flowers and perfume made her sit up and gag. As many times as she had woken up within the room of her childhood self, the overabundance of cutesy things and the smells always overwhelmed her. The blonde quickly rushed over to her window and threw it open, letting some fresh air into her room. Almost immediately after, she went about putting all the perfumes, scented candles, and cutesy knickknacks into a bag for burning later. With a sigh, Ino plopped onto her bed and looked around her room. Okay, so I've still got the purple flower wallpaper. Must still be in the academy. Confirming her thoughts, she looked in a mirror to find herself in cotton purple pajamas, and her hair barely falling past her shoulders. Yep. Still in the academy. She groaned. She moved to sit on the floor and took a meditative position. Just as Naruto, she began to feel the chakra from the world around her give her knowledge. She focused mainly on her two lovers, trying to see what their relationship would be like in the current timeline. Much to her chagrin, she had been treating Naruto like crap and barely knew Hinata existed. With that confirmed, she moved on to her own personal life. Her mother and father were loving parents, like always, but her mother was not a fan of Naruto. It was by her words that Ino treated Naruto poorly. It was by her father's words that she did not hate the boy though. She smiled a bit. She hated it when both her parents would hate Naruto, but when it was only her mother, things were a bit simpler. On the rare occasion they both liked Naruto, or even rare occasion where one or both of them were dead, Naruto had a second home away from home. Her friendship with Sakura was already gone as the Uchiha's ego was rubbing off on them both. Sakura was being pompous and had beaten her previous bully, Ami, in a one-on-one spar. She had also beaten Ino a few times and had developed a superiority complex because of it. Ino frowned. Whenever the timelines made Sakura and Sasuke like that, it always led to trouble for Naruto, herself, and Hinata. Usually it meant the council and elders were on the Uchiha's side and they would end up dealing with a bunch of political nonsense, as she and her lovers constantly made the duo look bad. Ino, breakfast will be ready in 10 minutes. Hurry and get dressed. The voice of her mother made Ino smile. It had been a long time since she had killed her own mother. It would be refreshing to do it again after so long. Don't get her wrong, she loved her parents. She also loved Hinata and Naruto too. That didn't mean she didn't enjoy mixing things up with them once in a while either. They were used to it after all. They were probably clinically insane too, but that just made things fun. Besides, Naruto had promised her they would fuck things up in this run. Most likely meant they'd be lucky if they even made it to the academy graduation ceremony. So with a sadistic smile, Ino began to dress while thinking of ways of making her mother have an accident. She awoke in a sitting position. Her eyes snapped open and she took in a deep gasp as the world appeared around her again. She had found herself in this position countless times before. Only rarely would she be graced with waking up in a bed of some sort. With a sigh, she looked at the other two people within the room, knowing what was about to happen. Are you so weak-minded that even the act of meditating is too difficult for you now? The voice of her father made her skin crawl. Hearing this man speaking anything other than begs and pleas of mercy always made her sick to her stomach. "No, father," was her terse reply. She didn't have time to figure out what part of time she was in, and didn't bother with the formality at the moment. Once she had her memories and met up with her lovers, she would know what demeanor she would take. The tone his daughter used was lost on Hayashi, as he was used to not caring what the girl had to say to begin with. Looking to his left, he was happy to see his youngest daughter still with her eyes closed and meditating peacefully. When he saw Hinata re-enter her own meditative position, he quirked an eyebrow at the absolutely calm look upon her face. Again, not caring much for what the girl did, he was happy that she was properly meditating for once, and returned to his own serene state. On Hinata's end, she was doing her best not to take in any energy from the two beside her. As things stood, she already knew this timeline was going to be bullshit. It worked out fine for her. Just meant she would get to have some fun with certain people later. Depending on Naruto and Ino's moods, it would be sooner than later. Soon, the memories of her timeline began to race into her being. It was just about the same as usual. Her mother was a loving and caring woman. Hayashi seemed to be a bit more cold than usual, not even showing his own wife much love at first. However, a changing point was the death of her mother. This happened on occasion, yet Hinata could not contain her rage every time she saw it. Hinata's mother did not die giving birth to Hanabi as were the usual. This time, Hayashi himself had killed his own wife in a fit of rage for not giving him the son he wanted twice in a row. Hinata had seen it personally this time, which is why Hayashi treated her worse than usual. He had threatened her with death if she were to tell anyone. It drove Hinata to be even meeker than usual, and her sister had developed a hatred for her at an early age. This would not do at all. Usually she, Naruto, and Ino would agree to simply fall into their lives and let things continue until they were ready to start making big changes. However, she knew for a fact that she could not allow this timeline to move on like that. Not after their previous loss to chaos. She needed to blow off some steam, and the timeline had given her the perfect scenario to do so. Not like she wouldn't have enjoyed torturing her family even if they were loving this time around. Having a moral reason to do so was just icing on the cake. She saw that she and Naruto were both meek in this timeline, and Ino was a bit more egocentric than usual. That meant she and Naruto would draw the most attention when they changed. It was fine though. They would probably just end up fucking up the current timeline and moving on to the next one before deciding to spend time building lives. This would simply be fun. Next to her, Hayashi suddenly got an unnerving chill down his back. After finishing up with his morning, or in this case, new life routine, Naruto headed to the agreed-upon meeting spot whenever they had come back to a point where they were all in the village, Ichiraku's ramen stand. It was one of few places that the trio felt comfort in no matter what timeline they went to. Even the very rare few where the Ichirakus hated Naruto didn't sour their mood for the place. The happening was almost as rare as their encounters with chaos anyway. As per usual, Naruto was the first to arrive. "Good morning, Naruto, what brings you here so early today?" A well-spirited Tsuchi greeted the blonde. He immediately noticed the tired look in the boy's eyes but put it off as him not getting much sleep. "Didn't you start another year in the academy a few weeks back? What time does class start?" "In an hour. I'm meeting some new friends here for breakfast, Tsuchi-ji. I was excited so I got here early." Naruto stayed in character for the moment. The old man in front of him was one of also a few people he didn't enjoy hurting. Though he did kill him a few times to see the reactions of the villagers and his daughter, Naruto loved the man and his daughter almost as much as he loved Ino and Hinata. The trio usually avoided hurting the small family if they could. "That's great news, Naruto. I'll let you and your friends have your first bowls on the house." Tsuchi went to start preparing the meals. He already knew what Naruto would order and began to work on the blonde's meal first. That moment brought a sense of comfort to Naruto. It was another reason they always went to Ichiraku's before anything else if they could help it. The warm welcome they usually got from the ramen chefs eased their pain of whatever had caused their previous deaths. It never completely brought them back down from their negative emotions, but it was enough to get them started peacefully into their new life usually. "Where's Ayame?" Naruto asked, though he knew the girl simply hadn't awakened yet. "Still asleep, of course." Tsuchi laughed. "Sorry to say, but I think you'll be in class before she wakes up." "It's fine. Girls need their beauty sleep," Naruto joked, getting a small chuckle from the chef. A few minutes of idle chat went by before the first of Naruto's guests showed up. The second blonde called out to Naruto as she jogged over to the stand. "Morning, Inohikan." Naruto corrected himself. A quick glance at the ramen chef let him know he had heard. Thankfully, it just seemed as if the old man had come to the wrong conclusion or maybe right conclusion looking at the situation. "Morning, Naruto-kun." Ino called and jumped on the boy with a hug. The blush Naruto forced on his face confirmed Tsuchi's suspicions as a knowing smile came on his face. Ino turned to the smiling man as she released Naruto and smiled brightly. "Good morning, Ichiraku-san. My name's Ino Yamanaka. It's a pleasure to meet you." Ino bowed to the man. Tsuchi was taken aback by not only the young girl's manners and treatment of Naruto, but by her name as well. "So you're Inoichi and Kana's daughter? Nice to meet you as well." Ino had observed the two for a bit before showing up. She knew out of all three of them, Naruto preferred to take things slow. While she had no problem simply starting the day with arson or something equally ashit, her counterpart blonde had been in the loops a lot longer than herself and their last lover, though it didn't make much of a difference by then. Still, they respected Naruto's wishes to simply not go off and start blowing stuff up every time they awoke after a defeat by chaos. Before the two could settle into a conversation with the ramen chef, their last companion showed up. The Hyuga heiress walked with an annoyed look on her young face. Also out of the three, Hinata was the one most likely to prematurely start the fireworks. They couldn't blame her though. Usually when they arrived too far back in time, she had to put up with the bullshit from her clan for a bit. As she approached them, her expression brightened. Just as Ino, the starry-eyed girl, ran and jumped on Naruto with a hug. "Good morning, Naruto-kun." "Morning to you too, Hina-chan," Naruto responded, gazing lovingly into her eyes. This time Tsuchi was a bit shocked. Not only had both girls greeted his favorite blonde with more affection than he had ever seen the boy receive, but he knew for a fact that this girl was the Hyuga heiress. "Lady Hinata, it's an honor to have you here." Hinata frowned at Tsuchi's words. "Just Hinata is fine, Ichiraku-san." Seeing that the old man knew her, she threw in the stutter for good measure. "Hey, Hinata! Forgetting someone?" Ino called with a mock pout. Hinata giggled at her second lover's antics. She would have joked with her but decided to keep up appearances for a bit longer. She gave the taller girl a warm embrace. It would simply look like a friendly hug to the ramen chef though. "So what will you two lovely ladies be having for breakfast?" Ichiraku asked as he finished up Naruto's bowl. "I ate breakfast, but a bowl of miso pork would be great for lunch," Ino called, almost drooling at the look of Naruto's bowl. Of course, after being with the blonde for so long, both girls developed a love for the dish almost as great as his own. "I'll have the same, please." "With egg." Tsuchi nodded and happily went to make the meals. Hinata took her spot on the other side of Ino, putting the platinum blonde in the middle. They waited until they were sure Ichiraku was focused on cooking and that no one else was around before all three went through a few hand signs. A wave of wind blew over them. "Alright, so what's on you girls' minds?" Naruto asked seriously. The jutsu they had just used took a while for them to develop. It was like a cloaking jutsu. It allowed the trio a small pocket atmosphere around themselves where they could speak. Everyone else around them would hear a completely different conversation. This was done by syncing their chakras and minds through Ino, allowing them to almost communicate telepathically. They could do that as well, but until the girls could get their abilities back from previous timelines, this crude method was the best they had. "Mom hates you but Dad is neutral for the most part." Ino started. "Me and Sakura's friendship ended a while ago, so no love lost there. She's going to be a thorn in my side if we play nice. Hayashi killed my mother in this timeline, and Hanabi hates me because of him. Both the main and side branches see me as useless. He threatened to kill me if I reveal what I know of mother," Hinata reported. "Kurenai-sensei is useless here. She tries to be comforting but it comes off as patronizing a bit, and all it leads to is me trying to endure the suffering. I don't have a crush on you, Naruto-kun, because I feel you're just as pathetic as me." Naruto's sweat dropped at her wording. The Hyuga heiress blushed and waved her hands. "It's not like that, Naruto-kun. You know I love you." The blondes laughed at the flustered look on the Hyuga girl's face. "It's fine, we know, Hinata." Ino turned to Naruto next. "So, what about you? We still going to fuck everything up?" Naruto went into detail about his own memories of the timeline. He went into graphic detail of the beatings and the assassination attempts just to get the girls riled up a bit. It worked as both of his lovers were sporting almost sadistic grins. "This is going to be marvelous," Ino called, again drooling in anticipation. "How soon can we start?" Hinata asked eagerly, almost bouncing in her seat. Naruto hated to break it to them though. "Honestly, I wanted to spend a little time with Gigi in this one. See how much he actually cares." The crestfallen looks on the girls' faces made his stomach coil. "I guess I can just wait for another loop though." The girls perked up immediately. "We can start whenever you two want. But I would like to at least see who we would be teamed with in this timeline." "What? That's a whole year away," Hinata protested. "Come on, Naruto-kun. You just said we can start whenever we want." Naruto chuckled. Alright. But I still have to give you both your energy back. So we won't be doing anything in class today at least." Both girls groaned at that. They knew they could probably surprise everyone with their new attitudes, but they didn't know how much stress their bodies would be able to handle if they decided to start knocking heads in class. Naruto knew they wouldn't be satisfied with just that, but there wasn't much they could do at the moment. "How about working on your families first? I can get you both your energy back after class and then you can start at home." "You're just stalling," Ino cried out with a pout. Hinata nodded her agreement and huffed. "Savor the moment," Naruto argued. "It's not like we won't get another chance anyway. Take your own advice," Hinata called with a smirk. "We have all the time in the world, right?" Naruto couldn't argue with that. He would relent this time and let the girls have their way. Besides, he honestly felt like letting off some steam after their previous defeat by chaos as well. "Here you all are. I packed a lunch for all three of you. Next time you kids stop by, I want to know how you met this knucklehead." I can introduce you to my daughter as well, Tucci called as he set the bowls of ramen in front of the trio. Ino's was a bento, and Tucci had 2 other bentos waiting for Hinata and Naruto as well. With the old man back, Naruto subtly dropped their jutsu and smiled brightly. Thanks Tucci-ji. You're the best, the old man rubbed his nose. I know. After finishing their breakfast, the trio split up as to not arrive at school together. Ino and Hinata would listen to Naruto for now. Since either had their power, they would rather not cause too big of a scene. But then again, that also depended on how the class would react to them as well. Naruto knew if anyone got on Ino or Hinata's nerves too much, they could kiss the small time of peace goodbye. Naruto himself knew the Hokage would be questioning him about his relationship with the 2 girls too. He knew the old Kage was usually watching things through his crystal ball, and had most likely seen the breakfast he shared with the girls. Even as he was lost in thought, Naruto sensed a boy attempting, terribly, to sneak up behind him. With a sigh, he simply let the person shove him hard, sending him forward a few feet and landing face first in the dirt. Laughter filled the air as Naruto began to sit up. Turning to his assailant with a glare, Naruto again sighed. He didn't know the kid. It was always some unimportant prick when in the academy. He had hoped it would at least be Kiba or something. He saw Ino and Hinata trying to ignore the action, though Ino was fake laughing. He could see her clenched fists. It surprised him. Usually the girls would laugh too, seeing as something like this wasn't nearly as meaningful as it used to be. He chalked it up to them both being focused on getting through the day so that they could get home and really have some fun. The bell rung that signified they were allowed to enter the school. Naruto stayed on the ground, wanting to be the last one in. He sensed around for any watching eyes and wasn't surprised to feel Mizuki and several Anbu. Iruka seemed to have been in the class already, meaning he hadn't seen what happened. Maybe Iruka was the same as usual this time. Good morning, class. Iruka called cheerfully after all the students were seated and attendance had been taken. Almost immediately the trio began to tune him out. Naruto finally began to feel what the others were feeling. This was going to be boring as shit. Suddenly starting the mayhem a little early didn't seem like such a bad thing. He would have liked to look in on the Hokage, which he still probably could, but there was no way he was going to let things keep on like this for a year. He looked to Hinata in the back row and saw her already asleep. Looking to Ino, found her almost gagging as she pretended to swoon over Sasuke, with Sakura on the opposite side sending waves of hate her way. They were trying for his sake, he realized. He wouldn't make them suffer too long. For the most of the day, lessons went on like any other timeline. Even his work was laced with genjutsu to make things harder, like always. Things went by smoothly with neither Ino or Hinata deviating from the timeline much at all. He almost found himself hoping one of the girls would do something to spice up the day. During lunch, Naruto moved to the back of the room to eat in the same row as Hinata. As long as he didn't sit right next to her, he figured it wouldn't draw too much attention to them. So getting bored yet, Naruto-kun? The girl whispered without making eye contact. He could still see the makings of a smirk tugging at the corners of her lips though. Yeah? I was wrong this time, okay? I'm not used to coming back this far. No one's relationship is predominant enough for anything special to happen yet. He sighed as he began to dig into his ramen lunch. That's what we're here for. So what do you suggest, Haim? Hinata shook her head. I'm just going to watch you squirm for the rest of today. Not like me or Ino can do much right now anyway. Naruto chuckled dryly. My sadistic little princesses. You get off on watching me suffer. I would, but this body hasn't hit puberty yet. Hurry up and give me my energy so we can have some real fun. Hinata whined and whispered at the same time somehow. After class. The blonde reassured her. The two ate their lunches in silence afterward. With Ino, the girl was happy that the current her still decided to take lunch with her surrogate brothers Chuji and Shikamaru. The two were the same as always as well. Chuji humble and always eating, and Shikamaru lazy as all fuck. The three ate outside so that Shikamaru could lay about and watch the clouds for a bit before going back to class and falling asleep. What's the matter, Ino? Shikamaru called lazily a few minutes into their lunch. Ino froze, not sure if she had somehow done something differently already. She knew Shikamaru was a genius, but she had gotten used to hiding things from the boy over the centuries. What do you mean? Shikamaru cracked one of his eyes to glare at the blonde with a really, look. You're eating ramen for one? You hate the stuff. Plus you're not shouting about Sasuke right now. It's eerily peaceful. Oh wow, miso pork. I thought you hated pork, Ino. Chuji called with what she could sense was actually pride from the boy. She chuckled nervously and scratched her head. Just thought I'd go for a change of pace with my diet. If we're going to be running around and such, I'd have more energy if I actually ate more than salad, right? And I don't talk about Sasuke all the time. Both boys rose eyebrows at her addressing Sasuke without kun. She noticed her slip a bit too late though. This would be so much easier if she could just slit their throats then and there. But she didn't have it in her if they weren't being assholes. Just inquisitive. Oh look, I'm trying to change, okay? If I want Sasuke-kun, she almost vomited in her mouth. To notice me, then I'd have a better chance if I take being a ninja seriously, right? Shikamaru and Chuji couldn't argue with that logic. The big boned boy let it go, but Ino knew her smart brother wouldn't be so easily convinced. She also knew he was too lazy to pursue the matter anymore either. Whatever, he called with a yawn. As long as you're not being annoying, you can dye your hair pink for all I care. Ino stifled a giggle at the jab on Sakura but kept up appearances by hitting the pineapple-haired boy on the head. Don't call me annoying, Baka, the trio continued on as usual afterwards. Ino was happy to spend time with the two. She never knew when she'd end up in a timeline where the three of them didn't have the bond that they did. It happened rarely, but still often enough for her to appreciate the moments like these. With a content breath, she leaned back and continued to think about how to kill her mother. Hiruzen Sarutobi was worried. Granted, he was always worried about one thing or another. Threats from IWA, trade negotiations falling through with Kumo, Suna's treatment of their Jinchuriki. There was always something forever present within the old shinobi's mind that kept him from experiencing the peace he wanted. The forefront was definitely his surrogate grandson Naruto Uzumaki. Over the span of 11 years, the boy had been subject to all forms of debauchery at the hands of people he himself called friends and family. From being ridiculed and overpriced for simple items, to literally being beaten and hunted like an animal, the boy had been through what many shinobi would not experience throughout their entire career within a few years alone. But there wasn't much he could do about it. The Hokage enforced the laws as he could, however. It was just impossible for him to be aware of Naruto 24/7. He checked in on him almost every hour if he had the chance, but the duties of a Hokage were never done, not even with the help from his council and secretaries. It was bad enough the umbu he assigned to the boy usually came up with sudden illnesses whenever something happened to the child. There was really no one he could trust, and that scared him most. Within his office, the evening sun beginning to make its way over the horizon to give way for the moon within a few hours' time, the Hokage thought back on what he had seen earlier that day when checking in on his favorite blonde. Something was different. The situation as it was made the old man happy. However, it also made him suspicious. He had seen Naruto up early, which wasn't exactly anything to worry about. He also went to Ichiraku's ramen. Again, nothing out of the ordinary. However, the arrival of the Yamanaka heiress, along with her affectionate greeting of the boy, along with the not-so-later arrival of the Hyuga heiress with a similar greeting, had definitely thrown the old shinobi for a loop. For a fact he knew the three had no prior interactions with each other that would have led to such a greeting. If they had been speaking in the academy, their actions before that time didn't show any forms of budding camaraderie or anything. The first thing to go through Hiruzen's mind was that the Yamanaka heiress was playing some type of trick on Naruto. The girl had been less than cordial with him ever since they met, doing everything short of physically abusing the boy along with most others in his class. He was prepared to give a stern talking to the girl until the Hyuga heiress showed up and greeted both preteens in the same manner. The way they all held each other showed years of familiarity and deep, deep affection. Sarutobi didn't know what to make of it. Both Naruto and Hinata had been fairly meek and shy children. He knew they both held a bit of animosity towards everyone else around them besides the few key people in their lives that showed they cared. But they hadn't shown interest in one another. Oftentimes it seemed as if they loathed each other. Seeing the would-be shinobi conversing with the ramen stand owner, he wondered if he simply had been too unobservant of Naruto's school life. Maybe he simply misjudged the subtle nuances the trio had made towards each other. That is, until he saw them perform some sort of jutsu behind Tuchi's back. He couldn't tell what they had done, but the way they did it spoke of years of practice. As well, it was a jutsu he had never seen before. He may be old, but he was not called the professor of shinobi for no reason. His attention was fully on the trio, watching for any changes in their demeanor. At least, more than he could already see. Ino was usually rambunctious. However, seeing Naruto and Hinata conversing with such animation was new to him. Granted, he didn't pay as much attention to the Hyuga. He had seen enough of her to know the many displays of emotions crossing her face during their conversation was more than her family had probably ever seen. The icing on the cake was when Tuchi returned to the trio and they subtly dispelled whatever jutsu they had used. So it must have been some form of cloaking or silencing jutsu. Either or, those type of genjutsu were not something genin could use, let alone academy students. Ceiling arrays for those type of things were out of the question and price range for children like them as well. Yep. Suspicious. For the life of him, though, the third Hokage could not put a finger on what exactly was happening. But since it regarded his pseudo-grandson, he knew the best thing to do. Take him to get some ramen and talk about it. The classes for that particular day ended normally. Or boring, in Naruto and Hinata's words. Ino, surprisingly, was the happiest of them all. Her anger from the loss against Chaos was mostly replaced with a feeling of contentment from spending the afternoon with her brothers Chuji and Shikamaru. The cheery smile on her face wasn't lost on Naruto and Hinata, whom both shot her dirty looks for being happy when she should have shared in their misery. Oh, lighten up you two. Once we get our energy back, we can all have some fun anyway. Ino called as she practically skipped down the street in front of the two. They weren't afraid to be seen together, as when Ino and Hinata got their energy back, there would be nothing anyone could say to them anyway. If someone tried anything as they headed to Naruto's apartment, the blonde Jinchuriki himself had no qualms with kicking off some fireworks before his ladies could. The one day back in the academy reminded him why he hated the place so much. It was absolutely boring. Even Irika's awesome teaching couldn't change that after over 1 billion years of the same shit. It's not fair. Hinata whined again. You're such a social butterfly, Ino. You can enjoy being this far back in time. I have to deal with my fucked family, and Naruto has to deal with everyone. Ino's smile fell a bit. Hinata looked at the blonde, not expecting her words to draw emotions out of her. At least, not in this timeline. Sorry, Hina-chan. Ino called as she turned to face the two and walked backwards. I know it sucks to be back with your family like this again. I know I had things so much better than you both. We've been through this so many times, I can't help but be happy of the things I have. The trio had heard this speech plenty of times too. But their melding minds of the timeline always felt something for it. The emotion wasn't as strong as it used to be, but it was still there, fresh as always. And it makes me happier that I get to help you both through it. I'm not happy you two had to suffer, but now look at us. We can give back to them 1,000,000-fold. Having Shikamaru and Shuji help us sometimes makes me love them too. That's why I always get so happy when I can spend time with them. Naruto rolled his eyes. We know, Ino. Geez, you don't have to try and get sentimental on us. What, are you having second thoughts about this timeline now? Hinata looked at Ino with horror. She was far more than prepared to fuck things up. She didn't want them both backing out then. A 2-against-1 vote was how they did things usually. The platinum blonde shook her head. No, of course not. I've already thought up a game for Mom and everything. But I kinda agree with Naruto on this one. I want to hang around for a bit instead of just blowing everything away in one go. Hinata folded her arms and pouted again, making both blondes chuckle. You guys suck. I don't be like that, Hinaheim. Wouldn't you like to hear your dad begging you to spare his life for a few days? Hinata's pout slowly faded. She mumbled. Both blondes stepped closer. What was that? Ino asked with a smirk. I said ye, the dark-haired girl mumbled again. Hina-chan, we can't hear you. Do you want to make Hayashi watch as you slowly dissect the skin from his body and methodically feed it to the elders of your clan? Ino prodded some more. Hinata huffed. Yes. Ugh, you two always know how to sweet-talk me. That's my girl. Naruto called and scooped the smaller girl into his arms, getting that cute eat from her that definitely fit their timeline. Though they had spoken the entire time while walking through town, they had once again activated the jutsu from earlier. Not a single person in the village knew what they had truly been talking about. As such, they reached Naruto's apartment with nothing more than several dark glares and confused gazes towards the lovely young ladies with him. Inside of the apartment, Hinata and Ino were mildly surprised to see the blonde had cleaned up. It had taken them over 1,000 years to make him realize that keeping up appearances only needed to go so far, especially since no one had really visited his apartment. He insisted on just in case people broke in, he wanted them to think he was still a lazy good-for-nothing. They knew he just didn't like cleaning. They had him use clones to beat into him that cleaning was the right thing to do. Every now and then, he still left a mess no matter what, sometimes just to spite them. The two girls moved into Naruto's small living room and immediately began to undress. Once they were both completely naked, they sat back to back and awaited the Jinchuriki. Naruto returned moments later with several scrolls and ink. He himself was shirtless. All three blushed as they looked on each other. Only Naruto felt anything more than slight arousal, however. His body and mind were both over billions of years old, while the girls before him only had the minds of their previous selves. He started with Ino, carefully painting intricate lines starting from her face. As he made it down to her neck, feeling her shiver at his touch, he knew that her body, being on the cusp of puberty, was starting to react in ways it never had before. It was predominant as he painted over and around her, and making her squirm in displeasure. As he reached her navel and put the most intricate seal there, she was panting heavily, her eyes lidded with fear. Her body sent signals that only her adult mind could comprehend, and it contradicted with what her present mind knew. Hinata looked on in both apprehension and longing. She wanted the feeling of wanting Naruto's touch, not just his company. Their collective minds were always at war with their present state until Naruto could restore their energy, and in turn, their bodies. As Naruto channeled a small bit of chakra into the seal on Ino's stomach, Hinata turned back around, knowing she was next. He repeated the process with Hinata, getting the same reactions as he had with Ino. Her were just a tad larger than Ino's, seeing as she wouldn't start developing as much until midway through their final year of the academy. Still, he had to add a few more lines to her chest, much to her pleasure and discomfort at the same time. Once Naruto activated Hinata's seal, he laid on his back and allowed the girls their turn. Hinata straddled his waist first, her pure sex pressed against his growing erection through his pants. She frowned as the feeling was still a bit uncomfortable due to her body. She wanted to do so much more with him. Instead of focusing on what she couldn't have at the moment, she began to form a larger seal around the one already around his navel. As she worked on that, Ino sat over his face, giving him a view she knew he loved. The feeling of his breath on her sent shivers down her spine. Again, her body shook with more fear than her mind had. She hated it, every single time. But it was fine. As soon as this process was done, that fear would be replaced with absolute pleasure. Naruto himself only glanced minutely at Ino's sex. He wouldn't touch her just yet, showing his godlike self-control. He felt the platinum blonde painting a copy of the seal Hinata was painting on his chest, upside down. The girl was even able to copy the QB seal while upside down on the center of his chest. It was with practiced ease even, and the feeling of both girls' delicate brushes made him shiver in excitement. After only a few more seconds, the girls were finished. They moved from their lover and allowed him to stand. The feeling of his chakra making the seals about his body spring to life overwhelmed them. It prevented them from rising, letting them know exactly how weak their current bodies really were. Naruto smirked at the annoyed looks on the girls. He moved to Ino again first before pulling the girl to her feet. He pulled the girl forward and held her close, their bodies pressed together. The ink from their glowing seals formed a bigger array between them perfectly. Naruto took Ino's lips as his own and Ino's weakness tripled, her legs giving way. He held her steady as she moaned into the kiss. The glow of their seals became a blinding light until the lines began to move from Naruto onto Ino's entire body. Soon enough her weakness abated and she was able to stand on her own, wrapping her arms around Naruto's neck and deepening the kiss, their tongues probing the other's mouth with familiarity. When they pulled away, Naruto's body was free of the seals. He stepped aside and allowed Ino to move to Hinata with her body glowing with the bigger seal array. Just as Naruto had, Ino pulled Hinata into a deep embrace and kiss. Their bodies pressed together, the seal array began to spread onto Hinata's body, making the one on her even more intricate just as Ino's. The two's tongues probed each other's more gently than they would with Naruto. Naruto knew the girls liked each other's kiss a little more than his own. They kept it a secret for over a century why, and the clueless boy still didn't know the answer. As Hinata and Ino pulled apart, their bodies shone with an outline of their older selves. The images formed a sort of chakra cloak around the two before fading into their being, along with the glowing seals about them. With the process finally done, both Ino and Hinata once again took each other's lips, falling back onto Naruto's cough. The apprehension their bodies had been feeling turned to sheer heat and want. Naruto could see their thighs glistening with their lust already as they sucked at each other's skin and fondled one another. The primal arousal he was feeling grew as he watched them, hearing their moans of pleasure and the sound of their sucking. His pants tightened as his manhood painfully strained against the fabric. Before he could disrobe to join them, however, a knock on the door froze all three of them. Without hesitation, they began to dress and sense for the person. Feeling that it was the third Hokage, they all relaxed. The girls looked to Naruto with looks of confusion. He nodded, letting them know the old man had probably been watching them. They let out sighs, more annoyed than worried. There was nothing the man could do to them at this point now. All they would do was wait to see what Naruto would do. The third Hokage stood in front of Naruto's apartment door with a stern gaze. He was beyond worried now, and though he had initial plans of simply asking Naruto what was wrong, the energies he had just felt from within his apartment had him ready to signal for Anbu on a moment's notice. He had checked up on Naruto with his crystal ball before leaving his office. He saw him walking through town with the Hyuga and Yamanaka heiress again, going towards his apartment. He hated that his crystal ball could not play sound, though he realized once they reached their destination that they had used the same jutsu from earlier. As much as he wanted to give Naruto the benefit of the doubt, his actions along with the girls were starting to send up red flags. What made things worse were the powerful chakra spikes he felt. They were beyond anything he had ever felt, even from his own sensei the second Hokage, or that of the Kyuubi. Even more, they were so controlled that the only reason the old Kage even felt them was because he was standing directly in front of the Jinchuriki's door. He would have been a lot more worried if the feeling was malicious. He didn't feel the Kyuubi's energy, though that didn't mean much honestly. If anything, he was more confused that the predominant thing he felt from the spike was lust. The energy made his mind drift to the books written by his former student, but he shook the thought away. Something was going on with his favorite blonde. His irrational care for the boy made him constantly think of a positive to the situation, whatever the situation may have been. With slight trepidation, the Hokage knocked on the door, feeling the energies of lust freeze up. A small smirk formed on his face. So the trio were getting more frisky than their ages showed and he had interrupted. He didn't exactly approve, but since it was Naruto he would turn a blind eye. Several seconds later, his smile faded as he took in the inquisitive look of the blonde before him. Naruto wore a black tank top with his orange pants. His hair seemed a bit more shaggy than normal. "Good evening, Naruto-kun." "Hello, Gigi. I know you have questions, so you might as well come in. Tell your ANBU if they set foot in my house, they'll regret it." Naruto's tone was followed with him glancing at the three hidden ANBU about the apartment hall and across the street. Sarutobi wasn't really surprised Naruto had found them. Whatever was happening was numbing him to surprises for the most part. Something was up, as he had kept repeating to himself, and it would be best if he didn't overreact right away. Instead, he nodded to his ANBU and entered Naruto's apartment alone. He took note of the two girls he expected to see, both with annoyed gazes. They refused to make eye contact with the Kage and figured they were just upset he had interrupted them. Naruto walked past him and stood closer to the girls, folding his arms and awaiting the old man to speak. "Hello, Yamanaka-chan." "Hi, Hinata, please, Hokage-sama." "I don't care for my clan name," Hinata called tersely, still without making eye contact. She fidgeted in her seat, the small amount of ki he felt from the girl coming and going just as fast as her reply. He saw the blonde mind walker place a hand upon her thigh, comforting her. They shared a warm smile between each other that made Sarutobi smile just a bit. All right then, Hinata-chan, the Hokage replied with his sagely warmth. Hinata and Ino looked at him in mild surprise before sharing the smile themselves. It seemed they hadn't expected him to be so polite after walking in on them. Turning back to Naruto, he saw the sad look in his eyes. He wondered why the boy looked upset. Is everything alright, Naruto-kun? He asked. Naruto shook his head. Gigi, just ask the questions you want. The sooner you know the truth, the better for everybody. More red flags went up. Why don't you just explain everything to me, Naruto-kun? My questions would likely lead us in circles as I don't know what exactly to ask. Naruto smiled. The old man was as smart as ever. Good thing they had gone through this same scenario not even 100 years ago. First and foremost, me, Hinata-chan, and Inohime are from the future. And by future, I mean multiple futures because we've gone back in time more times than any of us can count. Each time we enter a slightly altered timeline and rarely we get one we've been to before. Naruto continued on to explain about chaos and anything else he felt like letting the old man in on. When he got to the part about him and the girls committing mass murder, however, the fear he saw in the old man's eyes let him know their short time of peace was probably going to be over really soon. On the Hokage's part, he initially thought Naruto was simply playing a prank on him. However, Naruto flared his chakra, along with the girls, and shared knowledge that no doubt couldn't have come from anywhere but the future. The red flags had become blaring sirens. His mind was racing with the information. From what he could tell, the children in look only he knew now had no qualms about destroying any and everything around them. The feel of their chakra and the power they exerted was not a threat. It was a warning that if they wanted, they could and would take him out with little to no effort. Looking at the blonde before him, he swallowed the lump in his throat. This was not the child he had grown to love as a grandson. He was what he had hoped he would never grow into. I cannot allow you three to have your way. Another flare of their chakra made the Hokage freeze up. You don't have a choice, Gigi, Naruto said sadly. I already promised the girls we would fuck this timeline over. I wanted to see you first, to see how you felt about the me here. I'm glad you looked after me, though shit still happened. I understand you were busy as Hokage and couldn't be there all the time. Because of that, we wanted to give you the choice. Would you rather die now so you don't have to watch what we're going to do, or do you want to just let us do our thing and ignore what's happening? His heart sank. Naruto frowned deeper too at seeing the horror upon his grandfather's face. Sarutobi looked into Naruto's eyes and saw just a small hint of regret in them. However, he knew that the boy had most likely killed him plenty of times over. One more time wouldn't mean much to him. Naruto, I'm sorry you have had to go through what you have. Not just from this life, but every lifetime you've had to live. I wish we've been through this too many times. I'm not in the mood for it. Naruto scratched the back of his head. The third Hokage saw a small tear at the corner of the blonde's eye. He was faking his emotions to a degree. He would feel regret if he went through with what he was planning. Looking at the girls, he knew they would as well, the solemn looks of acceptance upon their faces. They cared for the old man, but they cared about their own happiness so much more. For them, they would see the old man again anyway. At least promise me this. Hiruzen started. Naruto, Ino, and Hinata looked up, already knowing what he was going to ask. He let out an exasperated chuckle. Whatever my word means to you three, in your next life, live normally. Please, the girls immediately nodded. Naruto let the single tear from his eye fall as he nodded as well. We will Gigi. See you in the next life. Sarutobi let out a sigh and pulled out his pipe. He lit it, and closed his eyes as he felt Naruto's overwhelming chakra freeze him in place. He couldn't move if he wanted to. It was strange though. Even knowing his life was about to be ended, and at the hands of someone he loved dearly at that, he felt peace. The peace that he thought he would never know again. Even if only slightly, he was happy to experience the peace, if only for a second. In the next instant, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. It was only for a moment as the feeling faded to a debilitating cold. Soon enough, he felt nothing. Naruto lowered the Hokage's body to the ground, his hand going right through his chest and heart, giving him a quick and almost painless death. He looked into the face of the old man, his current timeline's small voice screaming within his subconscious. The small, almost unnoticeable pain of regret within his chest let him know he was still human, if only just a little. He and the girls did enjoy killing, including the people they cared about. But never would they say they felt nothing when they did so. The hands on his back and shoulders brought him a bit more comfort. The girls hugged him from behind, their own auras bellying a little of the emotions he felt. We're sorry, Naruto-kun. Ino spoke into his ear, placing a chaste kiss on his neck. You'll be able to spend time with him in the next timeline. I know. Naruto called, beginning to calm down. They stayed silent for a few moments, simply enjoying each other's warmth. After they felt Naruto's emotions level out, they moved away. Inagit his memories. The platinum blonde nodded and moved to sit next to the Hokage's head. She placed his head upon her lap and began to extract his memories and emotions. The process only took a few minutes, and once it was done, Ino held a basketball-sized orb of white chakra. He really was a pure Hokage. No taint within him at all. She handed the orb over to Naruto. The boy closed his eyes and placed the orb to his chest, taking in everything that made Hiruzen Sarutobi himself. Afterward, the Hokage's body began to crumble into dust. Naruto shivered once the process finished, and he opened his eyes tiredly. Hikari Bunshin. Naruto called and flared one-hand sign. The technique was the miracle clone jutsu. Using the energy of the person he had absorbed, Naruto could literally make almost perfect replicas of them. The clone itself was still Naruto, however, it was under a permanent henge. As well, it held all the properties of a real-life person. The only thing it couldn't do was reproduce sexually. The only way to dispel it was to kill it like an actual person. It could be treated at a hospital and everything. Take the clothes and head back to the Hokage Tower, Naruto instructed. The Hokage clone nodded and departed. After he was gone, Ino and Hinata began to prepare to leave as well. After the unexpected start to their new lives, they weren't in the mood to fuck or even make love. They would let Naruto prepare himself for the rest of the deaths that were sure to come. They themselves had to take care of things at their own homes. We'll see you tomorrow, Naruto-kun. Hinata whispered and kissed him gently. Get some sleep. The sooner we do this, the sooner we can move on. Ino finished, kissing him as well. Naruto gave them a weak smile and nodded. Thanks. I'll see you later. With their departure, Naruto leaned back and sighed. The moment you don't regret your actions will make you worse than the monster you already are. Kurama called once they were alone. He usually didn't bother him when he was with the girls. The girls were able to speak to him too, but after losing to chaos, he would rather give them their space. We're already only a step away. I don't think it makes much of a difference. Then will you kill Ino and Hinata, and let them remain dead? Of course not. Naruto snapped, but instantly knew what Kurama was doing. The Jinchuriki groaned at the triumphant energy the fox exuded. Alright, fine. We know it still doesn't justify any of the things we do though. Is talking about it right now going to change you back to how you were before? Is it going to stop you from killing people? Naruto paused. Of course it wouldn't. They could never truly go back. Even in the timelines where they did their best to protect everyone who deserved it. At the end of it all, it would only be something they did for fun or on a whim. We're little monsters in this timeline. No point in regretting it for too long. We'll repent in the next life. That's all you can do, Kit. Now go to sleep. There's going to be a lot of bloodshed in the morning. She was fairly certain she knew the reception she would receive when she arrived home. Though the others were still debating whether to draw out their playtime, she knew she would be getting most of hers out of the way that night. It wasn't that she couldn't control her emotions either, though part of her figured she couldn't. In this case, she didn't really want to. Hinata smiled darkly as she approached the main manor of the Hyuga compound. The guards had already alerted her that her father wanted to see her immediately in his study. A bout of giddiness made her stomach flutter. She always looked forward to the encounter with her father, letting him think he had all the power before stripping it away, piece by piece. She even loved it when they would almost make up and she would snatch his happiness away. Making him suffer brought her the most pleasure out of any of her kills within the village. There was no one, sans Danzo, that she hated more than her father. She wouldn't lie. There were the very rare and occasional times in which she didn't hate him. The timelines where he had always been the father that she wanted and treated both her sister and herself with the utmost love and respect. Part of her couldn't help but love the man because of it. However, what kept her hating the man was because it wasn't the original. Unlike the other two, she remembered her original timeline. It was only because she hadn't been in the loops as long as the two, and her memory was a bit better than theirs as well. Her father had always been neglectful. No, he wasn't as bad as this one or most of the others that she ran into. But she had been removed from her timeline before they could ever make up. Plus, for almost a millennium afterward, every rendition of her father had been either as bad or worse. It was only after she had already gone insane and had an insurmountable hate for the man did she finally experience a loving version of him. She was so put off by the man that she treated him like absolute shit. Eventually she drove the man to commit suicide by detailing the versions of himself in other timelines. When he died, she finally felt remorse for the man, deep remorse. To the point where she was unable to kill the Hayashi in the next timeline, though he was a prick just as usual. She reevaluated everything she had thought she knew of the man. The nice version she had run into was from a timeline in which the trio had said they would protect. Hinata had gotten to know the man yet had done nothing to reciprocate his feelings. She regretted it. Finally, after so long, she had received the love of a father that she had only ever dreamed of, and she spat upon it. The next time she ran into a nice version of her father, she played the part of the loving daughter. It was wonderful. Yet, as she stated before, the centuries of hate couldn't be erased by one lifetime of happiness. Especially when the next few hundred years were of progressively worse people with the name Hayashi Hyuga. The situation reflected the girl's broken sanity. She had a love-hate relationship with her father in almost every sense of the word. When he was a kind and loving father, she would usually act the part. But before she knew she and her lovers would die, she would kill the man in what she deemed a loving way. She paused when a small pain struck her heart. Regret always decided to stop her fun whenever she least expected it. She hated it. A part of her wanted to relinquish all emotions she had, so she could simply enjoy the things she did. But there was always a small part of her keeping her from going over the edge. The Hyuga heiress knew it was the only thing keeping her with Naruto and Ino too. Both of them had told her on many occasions that the strong emotions she had towards her family were beyond insane. They understood where she was coming from though, yet they wanted her to make peace with her emotions as well. That regret she felt was a step towards what they wanted, but a step away from what she did. Oh well, she sighed as she began to approach her father's study. Even if she did end up making peace with her emotions, it didn't mean she wouldn't enjoy what she was going to do to her family. No matter what, she would always enjoy it. Hayashi Hyuga was not one to show his emotions. He was as stoic as ever, many associating his demeanor as annoyance or anger. They would be wrong. Hayashi prided himself on how calm and collected he generally was. The few times he had lost his temper, people had lost their lives, including his ex-wife. From then on, it was easy to keep those around him in fear even when he himself didn't need to do a thing. But apparently his daughter had been forgetting herself. Not only did she not return home directly after school, as she was instructed to do, but he was also alerted that the girl had gone to the QB brat's home. At face value, many would believe the patriarch was upset because the girl had taken a known risk by meeting with the child. Others would suspect that he was unhappy with the Hyuga heiress disobeying him when he explicitly told her not to associate with the Uzumaki child. Hayashi himself knew that the only reason the situation irked him is because associating with the village pariah would make the Hyuga look bad. Simple vanity, though they were partially right. The girl had the gall to disobey an order he had given. He supposed he had become too lax with her. He hadn't struck the girl in almost a week. Too bad that would be changing fairly soon. The creaking of the door sliding open to his study made him open his eyes. Strange. He hadn't sensed her coming. His gaze kept on her, as she silently slid the door shut and glided with a ghostly grace to sit upon the pillow before him. She didn't make eye contact, like usual. Look at me, child. His tone remained calm, his face stoic. He wasn't too upset, honestly. This situation was nothing a little discipline wouldn't fix. Though he was just a tiny bit curious as to what the girl was doing at the demon's den. Hinata looked up into her father's eyes with just as much a stoic gaze as him. He was taken aback. Her gaze was almost sinister. I heard you decided to go off on your own after your class ended today. He started, only being a bit unnerved by his daughter's glare. Yes. I enjoyed a leisure stroll with my two lovers, Naruto and Ino. Afterward we returned to his apartment, stripped naked, and got intimate. Years of hiding his emotions had not prepared him for that. Hayashi's jaw dropped for a moment before his brain processed what exactly had been said. His anger did show on his face, though he wouldn't care. Not only do you have the gall to disobey me, but you mock me and talk back to me all at the same time? You must not value your pathetic life any longer. Hinata tilted her head to the side, her stoic look fading and showing a cute confused stare. But I only spoke the truth, father. Or did you also want me to tell you that we killed the Hokage as well? How about that I've already slaughtered all of the Hyuga elders before coming here and I currently have Hanabi-chan tied up and unconscious outside this room. Hayashi was smart enough to know immediately that the girl before him was insane. Beyond the idiotic things coming out of her mouth, she was talking back to him in a way no one had ever dared before. She would die that day. You belligerent little. As Hayashi stood, so did Hinata. She stepped back as he reached for her, yet her curious gaze never left her face. Father, I'm only speaking truths. What has you so upset? She moved to the door as she spoke. See, Hanabi-chan is right here. When the door slid open, Hayashi's heart, as small as it was, skipped a beat. Sure enough, his second-born daughter lay in front of the door, naked and gagged. She was hog-tied with her wrists and ankles tethered together behind her back. All control be damned. Hayashi was at a complete loss, his mind racing and failing to place logic with what he was seeing before him. All of her words suddenly began to echo in his brain. Slaughtered the Hyuga elders, killed the Hokage. Normally there was no way he would believe all of that, but for the moment, he didn't know what to believe. Hinata, what is the meaning of this? Release your sister immediately. Hayashi's tone was less threatening than he liked. His confusion played out in his voice, and the glint in Hinata's eyes as her curious gaze changed to one of glee let him know she was aware of his building fear. He could only watch as the girl swiftly picked up her younger sister and darted away down the hall. Come and make me father! Her voice echoed throughout the hall, her following giggles sending a sharp chill down Hayashi's spine. He was only a second behind her, yet when he entered the hall, his daughters were nowhere to be seen. He instinctively activated his Byakugan only to shriek and cover his eyes as everything around him seemed to be a blinding light. What the hell was that? He groaned out. Seals that seemed specific for hindering the Byakugan was all he could think of. But how would Hinata have gotten her hands on them as well as lacing the entire Hyuga compound in them? The Hyuga had stumbled down the hall, an open garden to his right, and the moon finally sitting far above head. He slowed to a step and looked out over the garden. The compound was eerily quiet. No one was around, in which he would usually see someone patrolling as well as an older person or two strolling. For a brief moment, he debated activating his Byakugan again. However, he decided against it, and instead rushed down the hall towards Hinata and Hanabi's room. Before he could make it too far, Hinata's giggles stopped him at a T-crossing hall. All he could see was pitch blackness, but her giggles didn't fade. The hall was where the council chamber was, where the Hyuga held their meetings. Father, Hanabi's starting to wake up. You should hurry if you want to see her. Hayashi cursed his daughter and the daunting darkness. He ran headlong down the hall, doing his best to ignore how Hinata's endless giggles made the skin crawl on his back. The further down the hall he got, the darker it became. Most of this part of the compound was lit by candles and had no windows. On top of the darkness, a potent stench began to fill the air. Hayashi knew the smell to be blood. After what seemed to be an eternity, Hayashi saw a flickering light at the end of the hall. It was the room to the council chamber, and it looked as if a candle had just been lit. A chilling cold blew through the hall, seeming to emanate from the darkness. The giggles had subsided, and now Hayashi was left alone with a daunting silence. All rational thoughts were banished from his mind. There was an overwhelming sense of dread in him. The rage he felt earlier had pretty much vanished. A part of him was honestly worried for his youngest daughter, perhaps a primal feeling of paternity. If he didn't focus on saving his daughter, he'd give in to the unadulterated fear that gripped his heart. A soul-shattering scream put him back in motion. He burst through the door. She groaned as she began to stir. A sharp pain racked her entire body, and she shivered as a cold air hit her. Her head hurt something fierce, and her ears seemed muffled. The blurs around her and the weight in her skull confused her. She felt as if she were upside down. As things began to come into focus, she found that she was. She felt ropes tied to her ankles, suspending her in the air. Her arms were tied tightly behind her back. The slow creak of the rope as it swung lightly began to clear her hearing. She was staring at a blank wall, but the ceremonial cushion that was a bit in front of her let her know she was in the council chamber. Another pain shot through her as the memories of what happened came back. The 8-year-old was in her room after finishing her training and dinner. Her father had pushed her harder after news that her sister was out gallivanting. She thinks that's the words the elders used, with the one they called the demon brat. Her sister always pissed her off. She acted so meek when Hanabi knew she had strength. She had seen her sister training on her own and she wasn't weak. But whenever she was around the elders or their father, she would become a sniveling little prude. A sharp stench drug her from her thoughts. Her head cleared completely, for only a moment, as the next sight brought her mind to a standstill. As her body swung, she was slowly turning. Now having a view of the rest of the room, she was privy to a sight only fit for the most depraved horror movies. There was blood literally everywhere. Everything had been removed from the room save the teapot that sat within an indentation in the ground. Blood dripped from the handle of the bubbling kettle. Spread around it, as if they were awaiting the tea to finish, were the torsos of all 5 council elders. They were held steady by multiple protrusions of wood, the candlesticks that had once lined the walls. The sight and stench alone forced her dinner out of her throat, covering her face and going in her nose. She gagged and coughed, a combination of the overwhelming smell and being partially unable to breathe. Trying to swallow the filth in her throat was even more difficult, especially with her breathing becoming erratic. Father, Hanabi's starting to wake up. You should hurry if you want to see her. She tried to look for her sister after hearing her voice. The rest of the memories caught up with her. Hello, Hanabi-chan. Hinata's cheerful voice called out as the door to their room slid open. The younger Hyuga princess rolled her eyes as she brushed her hair by their shared vanity. What are you? Her words froze in her throat when she turned around. Her sister stood with her back to the door wearing a snow-white kimono. At least, it would have been snow-white if it wasn't stained red. Numerous blotches of the color covered the silky material. The same stains were on Hinata's chin and cheeks. Nini-chan? Hanabi's immediate thoughts surprised even her. For a moment she thought the blood belonged to her sister. She was surprised that the thought scared her. However, the beaming smile on Hinata's face told her she was perfectly fine. Physically at least. Hi, Amudo? Hinata chirped with her same mirth, giggling a bit. She hesitated. Are you okay? That's not your blood, is it? Hinata looked down at herself, her hands coming from behind her back. Hanabi's eyes dilated. Hinata's hands were dyed red. Her older sister looked herself over, spinning around while looking at her behind. No, I don't believe any of this blood is mine, she called happily. Hanabi stood and activated her Byakugan. Ah! She cried out as everything around her appeared to be a blinding light. She rubbed her eyes frantically until she felt hands wrap around her. She knew this feeling to be her sister's hug. She hadn't been hugged by her elder sister in over 2 years, yet the feeling brought back a warmth she didn't know she was missing. Wanchin? Don't worry, Hanabi, Hinata whispered. Hanabi slowly gazed up into her sister's smiling face. Her throat felt tight. Hinata's shining eyes didn't share the warmth of her touch or smile. This nightmare won't last long. Her world went black moments later. The sight of her sister was practically the same as earlier, except she seemed to have cleaned up. She didn't know how she had gotten the white kimono clean so fast, though that was the least of her worries. The truth of what was happening sunk into Hanabi's mind. Her eyes didn't dare move from her sister. She feared what other horrors could be in the room. Part of her figured the scariest part was her so-called weak sister being the one to do this. Funny how her softer emotions finally decided to rear their heads at a time like this. Of course she was crying for her loving sister to come back. More so than she was crying for her own life even. Finally finding her voice through all the pain, Hanabi let out a mournful wail. At the same time, Hayashi burst through the door. The putrid stench of death made him stagger in dizziness for a moment. He took in the sight in seconds, his dread forcing its way up his throat and onto the floor. His youngest daughter was alive, hung upside down. The elders weren't so lucky. He couldn't gaze at their limbless torsos, yet looking around the room yielded even more morbid results. The elders weren't just dismembered. Their heads were stacked in a small pyramid. Their eyes were sitting in a bowl next to it. Their tongues were nailed to the wall above their heads, blood smearing it with a message. Speak no evil. See no evil. Their limbs were scattered about the room seemingly haphazardly. But looking closer, Hayashi saw their fingers and toes were also removed and set up in ways that seemed to hold the limbs on pedestals. They were funeral pyres made of limbs. Welcome to the funeral of the Hyuga clan, father. Hinata stood next to Hanabi, holding her in place so she would not spin or swing any longer. The youngest Hyuga could only sob and cough. You're just in time to help me purge the elders of their sins. A baptism in fire will suffice, right? What have you done? Hayashi tried to shout out, but his energy was spent. The emotions running through him drained him. Hinata, what have you done? Hinata's smile froze on her face. Father, now that everyone is dead, you don't have to worry about me telling them what you did. They'll never know that you're the one that killed Mother. Hanabi coughed in shock and confusion. Hinata looked down at her sister to see her eyes darting to and from. Her mind must have been racing. She had latched on to another thought to take herself from the reality of what was happening. Sad that it had to be something else bad. Oh, sorry, Hanabi-chan. Father didn't tell you. He was so upset at Mother for giving birth to girls twice in a row that he strangled her to death, right in front of both of us. You were only a few days old at the time. The deranged girl pulled a handkerchief from her sleeve and began to wipe Hanabi's face clean. Hayashi didn't know how to respond. His daughter was completely insane. More insane than she could ever call him. What I did was wrong, but you're a monster. Hinata seemed to ignore him and continued to wipe her sister down, regardless of her cries. I'm a monster? All I've done is pay back people who've treated me like shit so far. You can say I'm a monster for the way I handled them, but in some people's eyes my actions are just. Hinata tossed the cloth away and put her hands into the sleeves of her kimono. She faced her father with the same stoic look he usually held for her. Yet you purposely killed your own wife. In front of her 4-year-old and newborn daughters. You held your hands to her throat as she kicked and begged. You kept eye contact with her as her life faded. Then without remorse, you turned to me and threatened the same to me. I wonder if you're any less of a monster than I am? Hayashi found a shred of courage as Hinata spoke. He jumped up, forsaking his Byakugan but thinking he was strong enough to end this farce without it. He thrust his palm forward towards Hinata, only to feel a searing pain in his palm. He yelped and yanked his hand back, feeling the warm blood dripping before seeing it. A pair of jade chopsticks pierced through his palms. He made to pull them out, but small seals shined on them, sending a searing pain through his entire arm just from touching them. He dropped to his knees. The man had never felt a pain nearly as bad as this. All he could do was groan in agony, his hope beginning to shatter. This girl was not Hinata. Look, father. Beneath all the fear, Hanabi's eyes are showing absolute hatred. But is it for me or you? Hinata held Hanabi's head steady. Tears still poured down her face into her hanging hairline. Yet her eyes were set into glares towards Hayashi. The man pushed past the pain to look into his daughter's eyes. This is your fault, he could feel her thoughts. I'll kill you, you little bitch. The Hyuga head growled out, but a sharp pain shot through his arm again, searing his mind with more pain than before. The smile finally faded from Hinata's face. A cold glare bore into Hayashi, chilling him to his core. The look on his daughter's face finally showed the genuine emotions she had been hiding. Absolute hatred was all he could see within her gaze. Loathing to a degree he had only ever felt for the Uchiha. You will not kill me. Your life was forfeit the moment I was born into this world. Tonight will be the end of the corrupted Hyuga bloodline. Hinata took slow steps as she circled her father. She spoke down on him, acting as an angel of death, which for all intent and purpose she was. Again Hayashi drew from his draining well of strength and lashed out at Hinata again. Just as before, chopsticks found their way into his palms and sent more jolts of pain through his arms. Now the pain met in his chest, preventing him from breathing properly. His breaths became labored as the pain refused to subside. He fell to his side, no longer able to remain on his knees. Tears streamed down his face as it felt as if electricity was being pumped through his veins and into a well of fire in his chest. The pain was breaking his mind. Nei-chan, Hanabi whimpered out, tears coming back full force. Please stop this, I am sorry. Please! Hinata's visage softened as she turned to face her younger sister. Hanabi, don't beg. Father doesn't deserve your kindness. Hanabi looked at their father. His mouth was open in a silent scream as the pain was enough to stop his breaths in his chest. He was shaking, his arms and hands stiff. His gaze was on his daughter still, but Hanabi didn't know how much he was actually seeing. Please, Yoni-chan, don't hurt me, I am sorry, she could only apologize. She didn't know what else to say. This was a nightmare beyond words. A nightmare she knew she would not be waking up from. The meek sister she looked down upon was the first to be slain by this young woman that now tortured them. She wanted her back. She wanted the timid and kind person her sister bared for the world. But she had no right to beg for her back, when she herself had helped kill her. Hanabi, I am not angry with you. Father turned you into a little monster. But he didn't see the monster I was becoming because of it. So I have you to thank for this. The Hyuga in this world are just a taint. A clan built upon lies and blood. It's only fitting that it ends in blood as well. You're innocent, Hanabi. A victim of circumstance. With your blood, we can cleanse the tainted history that this filth has led us down. Hinata knew her words sounded insane. For a fact they were. She sounded like some religious nut about to commit a sacrifice. In hindsight, maybe she was. Her words weren't exactly false either. That world's Hyuga clan was worse than the Uchiha. Hanabi and Hinata would only become puppets or end up dead. She rationalized she was doing the world a big favor by wiping them out honestly. The other part of her was just enjoying their fear. Unfortunately, it's time to end this farce. Hinata moved back to Hayashi and drug him by his legs. She pulled him directly under his hanging daughter. Hanabi's tears returned full force as she realized her sister would not spare her. She continued to cry out, calling for her sister, and knowing she was no longer there. Her huffs and hiccups didn't give way for coherent words any longer. Hinata Hayashi groaned out, his face contorted into a painful grimace, but now able to speak. Pleased and please, that was music to her ears. The nagging feeling of regret as Hanabi cried out for her was making her heart hurt a bit. But hearing Hayashi begin to beg, that's what she had been waiting for. She was surprised it took so long though. Hanabi usually was more defiant, threatening her and such before finally realizing her short life was going to be cut even shorter. This time though she had immediately started calling out for her sister. Hinata wasn't used to that. The regret she hated so much ate at her stomach, tying it in a knot, but she would not stop. She never did, and she was sure she would be able to push herself to continue. Besides, it was still pretty fun. Nei-chan. Hanabi's cries made her frown. Good night, Amuto. Hinata called. In the next instant a flash from Hinata's hands was seen. For a moment nothing seemed to happen. Then Hanabi coughed up blood. Soon enough a line spread across her throat, from one side to the other. Hinata wiped the blood dripping kunai clean on the sleeves of her kimono. Hanabi gagged and sputtered as blood began to run down her chin and over her face. The blood pooled fast, falling down onto the face and chest of Hayashi. The Hyuga patriarch could only let out strangled cries himself as the pain from his arms and chest persisted, and the sight of his youngest daughter being slaughtered like an animal completely broke him. His tears, for the first time in his life, were not for himself. He let out a painful howl as Hanabi's sputters slowed and her eyes faded. Her body stopped moving, save for the light swinging of her corpse as it hung from the ceiling. Hinata looked upon her father, having reached the pinnacle of her elation from the situation. Hanabi's suffering brought a sense of annoyance to her. She wanted to hate her sister. Her happiness was warring with the fact that she knew what she was doing wasn't fully justified. Killing her father she could justify. What she did to her sister and most of the other clan members, not so much. She wasn't supposed to be justifying it either. They did these things for fun. These warring emotions made her want to either punch something or just sleep it away. With a sigh, her elation began to fade. It was all downhill from there anyway. Her father's cries had faded as well. She looked down to see him passed out with his eyes open. She had broken him completely. It was fine. There was only one more thing left to do. With expert precision, she began to remove his eyes. Once they were out, she sealed them within a small scroll. She didn't want him to have a quick death, but at this point, she was bored with the whole thing. The Hyuga heiress moved his catatonic form into a sitting position. She took the chopsticks from his hands, making him jolt as the pain stopped suddenly. His broken mind registered his eyeless state, and he let out another howl. It was silenced as Hinata drove the chopsticks into the base of the man's skull. The pain would travel through his whole body, inducing paralysis, just before causing his heart to give out from the shock of such intense pain. She watched, as he fell over, his chest no longer moving. With a mournful gaze towards her sister's body, she steeled her nerves again. She needed to purge the rest of the clan. With them, there would be no regret. Kana Yamanaka walked through the village shopping district with an air of worry. She had recently heard through the grapevine that her daughter was suddenly associating with the demon boy. The woman's grief with the child stemmed from two different sources. One, the Yamanaka of course had suffered a few, though pretty minor, loses at the claws of the Kyubi. Kana was lucky that no one in her immediate family had been killed, but the collective feelings of the village motivated her to hate the child. Though her husband was indifferent to the child, borderline empathetic actually. She had never felt anything more than loathing for the boy. There was a small moment in time where she questioned herself, her husband being very persuasive on getting her to see the boy for something other than a demon. However, Mrs. Yamanaka was also a very vain woman as well. It was easy to reinforce her belief of the child for one reason. He was a social pariah. That was the second reason. Even if Kana had decided that Naruto wasn't a demon, him being a general outcast and misfit made her hate him. Irrationally, it was easier to say it was because he was a demon instead of admitting she hated a child simply because he didn't fit in and everyone else hated him. Against her husband's wishes, she had instilled some of that hatred in Ino. At least, she thought she did. One thing Kana had always known about her daughter was that she was a good actor and very proficient with hiding her real emotions. She knew Ino had been hurt by the broken friendship with Sakura. Her confidence had taken a hit, but Ino went on as if nothing was wrong with her. She sought solace in Shikamaru and Shuji more so than she did in running after the young Uchiha. Kana wanted what was best for her daughter, so she encouraged her to continue to pursue Sasuke, disregarding what she knew of her feelings for her lost friend. The older Yamanaka woman had instilled an unhealthy sense of vanity in her daughter. She wanted her to draw confidence from her looks and social standing, as Kana herself had done in her younger years. She believed it was what gave Ino her confidence in the first place, and knew if she focused on her looks instead of Sakura, she could get that confidence back. She had made it clear to Ino too, that the people she kept company with would affect her social standing, and therefore, her confidence. So it was obvious she would tell her daughter to stay as far as possible away from Naruto. If she couldn't, then she was to treat the boy with as much disdain as possible to show others that she in no way associated with him. For the few years they spent in the academy, Ino had been and done everything Kana wanted, so it surprised her to no end that several people claimed that her daughter, along with the Hyuga heiress, was seen walking through town acting as if they were the best of friends with the demon boy. Even more so when they said they went to the demon's house. Many claimed that they were in no rush to confront the child, especially since the Hokage had shown up at his apartment not too much later. There were no clues beforehand that would have alerted her to her daughter's interest in the boy. Perhaps she was simply lulling the boy into a false sense of security before hurting him? She wouldn't allow that. Beyond it being a bit cruel, even for the village pariah, Ino was taking an unnecessary risk by associating with him more than she needed to. But what did the Hyuga child have to do with anything? Kana was so lost in her thoughts that she hadn't realized the sun had already gone down, and she was nowhere near her home, or the shopping district. Where was she? In all her 27 years of life, she hadn't remembered being in this part of the village. She stood on a road that seemed only big enough to fit at most 3 people shoulder to shoulder. It seemed to be a residential back alley type road that curved downwards. How had she ended up there? What was worse was that there seemed to be no one else around. It was eerily quiet. Too quiet even for a ninja village. She turned around to head back the way she thought she had come from. Briskly moving upwards in what seemed a spiral, her skin began to crawl. The only sound other than her footsteps echoing around her was the building wind. She wanted to be out of that part of town as quick as possible. The spiral road seemed to go on far longer than it should. On the verge of believing something was wrong, Mrs. Yamanaka let out a sigh of relief upon finally exiting onto a slightly bigger road. Before she could realize that there was still no one else on the road, something caught her eye. The building across from her, it was the demon's apartment building. Had she subconsciously been making her way there to confront Ino? No wonder she didn't recognize that part of town. She would never set foot in such a dingy place. With a sneer, she prepared to turn and head home, only to see a flash of familiar platinum blonde hair in the window of the demon's apartment. Her eyes widened. Ino is still there? Her motherly instincts overrode everything she thought about avoiding the apartment. She dropped the bags she carried and dashed to the building. She burst through the door, not caring if she broke it or not. The scene before her made her heart skip a beat. For a moment, she couldn't process what she was seeing. "Hey mama!" Ino called happily as she straddled the waist of the demon boy, with a kunai in her hand, covered in blood. "Ino! What have you done?" Mrs. Yamanaka dropped to her knees. Her daughter sat atop Naruto's shirtless form. The boy was blindfolded with his hands tied to one end of the couch, and his legs tied to the other. He was not breathing. Obvious from the amount of blood that covered his neck and chest. "I'm almost done, mama. Give me a sec." Ino continued to stab into the already deceased boy's chest, the wet sounds of his flesh being torn into making Kana's eyes widen. She turned away and threw up what little food she had eaten that day. "Ino, stop!" she called out as she began trying to recompose herself. Tears were already swelling in her eyes and her mind was racing about what could have happened. Ino cocked her head to the side and looked at her mother. "Why do you look so sad, mama? I killed the demon like everyone kept saying. You always said you hated him, so now he's gone. Aren't you proud of me?" Ino stood from the boy and bounded over to her mother with a skip and beaming happiness. Her eyes shined, looking for approval from her mother. Kana flinched when her daughter got close. "Mama, Ino, what you've done, this is murder." Kana steeled herself. "I never told you to do this, but you said to hate him and everyone else hates him too. They all said we'd be better off if he was dead." You said so too. Kana's stomach fell at Ino's words. The scared look in her daughter's eyes as she seemed to realize what she had done pushed Kana's own fear away. But Naruto all said. Ino began to cry as she dropped her kunai. Her eyes widened as she slowly turned to look at the boy. Kana didn't let her, and instead pulled her into her own chest. Don't look, Ino. She began to rub her daughter's back as she cried into her chest. It's okay, everything is going to be okay. It's not your fault, sweetie. I'm so sorry. As she comforted her daughter, her mind was racing. She couldn't believe what Ino had done. Even worse, she knew it was mostly her fault. The older Yamanaka had always wondered whose hatred would go far enough to actually end the boy. She herself never truly wanted Naruto dead. She didn't even wish great harm on him. However, she thought it was inevitable with the way the village treated him, and she didn't think too much on it. For a fact, she was sure no one would truly go that far. But seeing the image of her daughter stabbing him repeatedly with confused glee, then the broken form of herself now, she was to blame. This should not have gone this far. Vanity be damned. She had turned her daughter into a murderer by following the crowd and worrying about her social standing. This was the price to pay for tainting her daughter's mind with hatred. I know I need to protect Ino. Regret can come later. The woman thought, doing her best to hold back her own tears. For once, the tears were actually for Naruto. The boy didn't deserve to die, especially in such a cruel way. But Ino was her first priority. I need to cover this up to get rid of the body, Mama. Ino whimpered in her grip. Kana leaned back and looked in her daughter's eyes. What is it, baby? Ino didn't respond. She looked into her mother's eyes before fainting in her grip. Kana cradled her daughter with worry. Is she going into shock? No, not now, sweetie, please. Kana shook the body of her daughter a bit, calling her name. She began to set Ino's body down, still thinking of how to deal with getting rid of Naruto's body. However, once she had laid Ino down, she noticed her own hands. They were stained with blood. What is this? She cried and stood swiftly. The older Yamanaka looked down to her daughter's body to see a puddle of blood pooling around her. Ino! She cried out and turned her body over to see if she had been injured somehow. There were no marks on her. The woman was confused for a moment until she turned Ino back over and fell back in surprise. Instead of Ino, Naruto was laying in the pool of blood now. What's happening? This must be a trick. She fumbled to get her hands in the correct seal before shouting Kai. Just as she thought, the world around her wavered as the genjutsu faded away. She appeared sitting in front of Naruto's apartment. She stood and shook her head to clear her mind of the images she had just seen. It had to have been that damn demon brat. The woman had half the mind to barge in again but was afraid of falling for another genjutsu. She decided the best course of action was to alert the Hokage of what had just happened. It's not over yet. She turned on her heel at the voice of her daughter. Ino stood in Naruto's doorway, covered in blood just as she had been in the genjutsu. You thought it was fake? Ino asked as she stood aside and showed the corpse of Naruto still tied to the couch. Ino? Kana's heart skipped a beat again and she paled. Once again she attempted to dispel the genjutsu. Unfortunately this time nothing happened. Her heart sank further and she paled. And this is real? As real as I want it to be. Ino called before disappearing into thin air. The floor beneath Kana suddenly opened up and she felt herself falling into a pitch-black abyss. Her scream was swallowed along with her body. After a few seconds of falling she would hit the ground hard, a jolt of pain racking her body and taking the air from her lungs. She was in so much pain that she couldn't move for several moments. When the feeling subsided enough for her to try and stand, she was surprised to see that she was somewhere familiar. She was in front of the academy building. There were several people out and about, and it seemed as if the children were just getting out of class. Ino? Why are you doing this? Kana cried out, knowing that this had to be another genjutsu. But she couldn't dispel it. Perhaps Ino had learned a new mind technique of their clan. But why would she be showing her own mother something so cruel? Shut up, Naruto baka. Ino's voice came from behind Kana. She turned around only to be pushed to the ground. She looked up into the face of her daughter, only she was 2 years younger. A 9-year-old Ino stood with her short blonde locks framing her face and a purple clip in her hair. She stood smugly over Kana, confusing the woman. Her confusion turned into realization as she saw her own visage 2 years younger standing off to the side, watching the scene with pride. Confirming her growing fear, she looked at her own body to find that she was indeed made to look like a 9-year-old Naruto. My mommy was right. You're nothing but a demon. Don't you know the difference between a weed and a flower, dummy? Ino threw yellow dandelions down at Kana/Naruto's face. Kana, unfortunately, remembered that day too. Naruto had given Ino some dandelions, thinking they were flowers. Ino at the time was going through troubles with Sakura and a kind gesture from the boy had made her blush, much to Kana's annoyance. When Ino came to show Kana what Naruto had done, Kana ignored the smile on the girl's face and sneered. Ino, those aren't flowers. They are just weeds. The little demon is calling you a pest by giving you those. Do not let him insult you. Ino had taken her mother's words to heart, and had shoved the boy down before yelling at him. Being in his position, Kana could even feel the emotions flowing through Naruto. She thought it would have been anger on top of sadness, but no. It was an all-consuming grief. The boy was heartbroken. It seemed as if he had truly wanted to be friends with Ino, and the sight of her not immediately pushing him away had given him a sliver of happiness. Not even moments later had it been stripped away, and the pain that stabbed at her heart was unbearable. Looking around, she could see all the other parents and students looking at her the same way. They all loathed her. They were glaring at her, snickering at her, taunting her. She was just trash who didn't deserve happiness, and she didn't know why. "I'm sorry," Naruto's voice escaped her mouth. "I'm sorry, Ino-chan. Don't call me that, baka." Ino kicked him the gut for good measure before running back to her mother. The world faded to black. Ino, her own voice that time. The image of her daughter appeared again, arms folded and neutral gaze upon her face. Yes, mother? She needed to get her bearings together again. The pain she felt from whatever had just happened to her ate at her mind. The anguish of being alone and hated for reasons she didn't understand, they were so much greater than anything she had felt before. Ino, please stop, I get it, I am so sorry. I won't make you treat him badly anymore. Kana meant it too. That one moment she was forced to experience had put into perspective what exactly Naruto had been dealing with. Whatever little part of her thought he truly was the demon was quelled immediately. The pain he felt was something a demon could not. The feeling of being socially ostracized was most certainly clear to her as well. She didn't wish that on the boy, not one bit anymore. She knew he must have been hurting, but never to that degree. Really? Only after a few minutes in one of his memories? Ino placed a hand on her hip and walked towards her mother, her eyes narrowed. Are your convictions so shallow, so fickle, that that's all it took to make you see how wrong you were? Yes. Yes, Ino, I was wrong. Please, please, no more. Ino's brow twitched and slammed her foot into her mother's face. She stood over her and pressed her foot to her chest. You're absolutely pathetic in this timeline. Ino placed pressure on the woman's chest. She gasped out, not knowing how her daughter had so much strength in her small body. I expected you to defend your stance on him to make this more fun for me. What are you saying? Kana wheezed out. Ino removed her foot and turned away. I had a whole night of fun planned for you, but you're so weak-minded that you've already broken. Ino's fists were clenched. That won't do. That won't do. It won't do. It won't do. It won't do. It won't do. Ino shook her head back and forth as she spoke. Kana knew then and there what was wrong. Her daughter was absolutely insane. No, 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 no. Ino faced her mother again with a sadistic smile, her eyes wide and seeming to glow in the blackness around them. You're supposed to make me hate you even more for hating Naruto. I don't hate him. I don't hate you either, Ino. Please calm down, and we can go see him. Kana pleaded, moving to her knees. She needed to talk Ino down. Then she could take her to Inoichi and make her forget all of this. Ino threw her head back and screamed. Then she leaned forward, her hair covering her eyes from view. She was silent for several seconds. Kana held her breath, afraid of what would happen next. Mama, Ino whispered. Why yes, baby, you're boring. Ino's voice was blank. She vanished again and Kana felt herself falling into the blackness. She awoke, with a start, her breathing ragged and her body drenched in sweat. She held a hand to her chest and winced as the light of the morning sun momentarily blinded her. A nightmare? It was all a nightmare? She wondered with more hope than she realized. For a few moments she could only try to get her breathing in order. Her skin was cold and clammy, her body felt weak. She was shaking slightly and her mind was a bit numb. Oh God, she whimpered and shed a few tears. It was all too real for her. All she could do was hug herself as she remembered the sadistic visage of her daughter and the deceased form of the village pariah. She wanted to find and hug them both immediately. She wanted to apologize to them, especially Naruto. But a small part of her felt the same as before. Maybe I should just forget about it. The Yamanaka matriarch took several more minutes before exiting her bed. After going about her morning routine, taking extra long in the shower to clear her mind, she made her way to the flower shop floor. To her delight, Ino was at the counter looking just as bored as she expected. Good morning, my little angel, Mrs. Yamanaka greeted, only to receive no response. The woman cocked an eyebrow. Young lady, I'm speaking to you. Before she could move to touch her daughter, the front door opened. Hey, Daddy! Ino called happily and moved around the counter to hug her father. The man caught her and hugged her back with a chuckle. Wow, you're up early. What's the occasion? Inoichi asked with mirth. You were gone, so I had to look after the shop. No one else would have, or did you forget that we have a business to run? Ino scolded her father. The man chuckled sheepishly. Kana growled a bit before stomping over to the two. Excuse me, but what do you two think you're doing? Kana reached a hand towards the man, felt nothing. Her hand passed right through them. She looked at her hand and then at the two before her. What the hell? She tried again just to get the same result. Anyway, now that you're here, Daddy, I'm going to head over to Naruto's. We've got a date in a bit. This early? Inoichi asked. Yeah. We're gonna help out Iruka-sensei with the incoming academy students first, and then spend the day together. Ah. Well, have fun then, sweetie. You have fun on your date too, Daddy. Ino called and dashed out the door. Inoichi blushed, not having realized his daughter knew about his own escapades. He shivered. How does she do that? Maybe she is the gossip queen of Konoha, he mumbled before walking right through his wife and setting up to take over for Ino. Darling! Inoichi-koi! Kana pleaded with her husband. The tears from earlier returned as she realized that her nightmare wasn't over. Unfortunately, she realized, none of it was a nightmare. She moved to the door and on instinct walked right through it. The bustling crowds of Konoha's early morning moved about as if nothing was wrong. I need to find Ino so she can stop this madness. Knowing where the girl was headed, Kana made a beeline for Naruto's apartment. Every single person she passed that ignored her, intentionally or not, brought more dread to her stomach. She pushed the thought away in hopes of simply getting past it all. She walked right through Naruto's door and paused at the sight before her once again. Ino stood before her, looking right in her eyes. The annoyed look on her face sent a chill down Kana's back. Not wanting to be caught off guard again, Kana spoke first. Ino, end this nonsense immediately. This isn't funny in the slightest. I understand what you want. I won't treat Naruto unjustly anymore. If you want to see him, so be it. He can come over whenever you want, I promise. She went from stern to pleading. The elder Yamanaka could not keep it together. Her mind was shattering from what seemed to be never-ending karma. Ino didn't say a word, thought Kana knew she had hurt her. Ino's gaze slowly went from annoyed to anger. Naruto-kun, let's go. I'm bored now. From thin air, Naruto appeared next to Ino. The power Kana felt from the boy almost floored her. He grabbed her daughter by the waist before shrugging at Kana. Sucks to be you, were his simple words before he disappeared with Ino in tow. You brat! Where are you taking my daughter? Ino, come back! The woman screeched for a few minutes before she realized they were gone, and probably for good. Stepping back out into the streets of Konoha, dread fell upon her once again. Someone, she whispered, only for no one to pause. Anyone, she whispered louder. Answer me. She tried to grab someone, but they simply phased through her. She dropped to her knees as she realized even though she was surrounded by people, she was alone, ostracized not from the village as a pariah. She was being forced to exist without existing to anyone else. Ino, please, she whimpered. Please don't leave me alone, I am sorry. Please come back, she hugged herself and cried. Please help me, but no one came, and they would never hear. Not the next day, or the next day, or the next week, or the next month, or the next year, or the next decade. 10 years of being alone. Of seeing her daughter with the village pariah. Of seeing her husband with several other women. Of seeing her friends being happy. Of seeing her own grave being left to fade into the nothingness of everyone's memories. Naruto and Ino stood over Kana's unconscious form in Ino's room. Ino looked down at her mother with a look of pure rage. She wasn't supposed to change so fast. She made this boring. Ino growled and kicked the woman's prone form. Naruto patted her shoulder, only receiving a glare in return. This isn't the first time this has happened, Ino-chan. Besides, it's been 10 seconds, meaning you left her in absolute hell for 10 years already. Don't you think she deserves a little sympathy for actually feeling regret? Absolute hell being Ino's own unbreakable genjutsu, putting even the Moon's Eye Sharingan to shame since she had complete control of hers. Ino wanted to punch Naruto in the face. Of course she knew her mother deserved a little sympathy. That's why this wasn't as fun. Why couldn't she have just been a devout Naruto hater like in other timelines? Even if she had seemed wishy-washy with feeling empathy for Naruto, she truly didn't want things to go too far with the boy. Whatever. Let's just take her to Daddy's room. I can't wait to be done with this stupid timeline. Ino huffed. Naruto smirked. So what should I tell the boss? Ino knew it was a clone. Nothing. He can just relax and enjoy the fireworks, she said as they moved her mother into bed with her sleeping father. You want to watch? She asked. The clone nodded. Ino smirked a bit. With a flash of her eyes, the genjutsu ended. Her mother shot up in bed. She made to look around, but her eyes landed on the sleeping form of her husband before anything else. With a growing wail that almost seemed inhuman, the woman moved to straddle her husband and put her hands to his throat. Cheater! Cheater, 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 cheater! She screamed with a sadistic glint in her eyes. Inoichi was startled awake, and his hands instinctively found their way to his throat. Another flash of Ino's eyes and the man's strength vacated his body. He was left helpless and confused as the love of his life strangled him with sinister glee. I'm alive! She cried out. I exist. I'm here. I'm not alone. Can you hear me, Inoichi-koi? Can you feel me? Inoichi reached a hand up to touch his wife's cheek, his eyes puffy and face blue from the lack of air. He wiped a tear from her face as his struggles began to slow. Even as his chest stopped moving and his arms fell limp to his sides, Kana stayed atop him, her arms pressed to his throat until blood began to spill from the corner of his mouth. The woman smiled as she felt Inoichi's body. She touched his face and his chest before leaning down and placing a kiss on his lips. I'm back, sweetie. Naruto and Ino watched silently as Kana staggered out of bed and moved to her husband's nightstand. She took 2 of his kunai and swayed unsteadily before heading down the stairs and out the house. Naruto and Ino moved to a window, knowing what was about to happen. Before they even saw it, a scream rang out in the streets. I exist. I'm here. Can you feel me? Kana's deranged voice rang out as she stabbed a random woman on the street. Those around her looked on in shock and horror before she sprang towards another person and swiftly ended their life. The people began to scream and disperse. In a matter of seconds, Kana's deranged laughs were all that was heard as 3ANBU appeared and pierced the woman through with their swords. The woman didn't stop laughing, even as her blood began to pool at her feet. She looked up, right at Ino and Naruto in the window. I'm here. Can you see me, baby? She asked before laughing hysterically for several more moments until her head was removed from her body. Only a moment later an explosion occurred at the Hyuga clan's main house. The explosion had been the signal. From that point forward, Naruto, Ino, and Hinata forewent any forms of acting. The blonde duo appeared in the middle of the road where the ANBU were and slaughtered them with no effort whatsoever. For the next few hours, the Hidden Leaf Village was subject to an unforgiving hell at the hands of 3 academy students. Those who survived and fled the village would forever remember it as the bloodiest day in the world's history, even more so than the Great Shinobi Wars. Several days after the trio had destroyed the Leaf Village did some of the other villages receive news of what happened. None believed it. It would be their mistake as the bloody whirlwind that was Naruto, Ino, and Hinata tore through them, one village at a time. Once it was well known that the trio were indeed on a warpath, several factions finally decided to take action. Their first encounter was of Jiraiya and Tsunade. They attempted to calm Naruto, assuming he was being controlled by the Kyuubi. But once he made it clear that he was in complete control and had no intentions of stopping the destruction of the world, the two were forced to try and kill the boy. The battle was short-lived and underwhelming. The trio had no intention of prolonging the current timeline with battles of grandeur. Jiraiya and Tsunade didn't even have time to call each other's names before their lives were ended. Next up, surprisingly, had been Orochimaru. The man claimed to have been interested in the trio, but after seeing their ruthless dispatching of his teammates, had grown upset. He told them regardless of their roads in life, he cherished his teammates, and would avenge them. Instead, he joined them, along with his apprentice Kabuto not even moments later. The village armies of Kyumo and Suna were their next opponents, all falling just as easily as the Sannin. The combined might of the Nibi, Hachibi, and Ichibi were nothing more than minor annoyances, all being wiped out by a single one of the trio. Ino had called dibs, wanting more action due to her mother's failed performance. The Akatsuki appearing next did not surprise them. With 3 of the 9 Bija dead, thanks to Ino, their mission was a complete failure. Their ambitions crushed. As far as they knew, they wanted nothing more than to take the trio's heads. Just as expected, it was short-lived. To say the battle had been one-sided would have been to say Madara Uchiha would crush Konohamaru Sarutobi. Even still, the battle wasn't even that fair. By the end of 2 weeks, Naruto, Ino, and Hinata had effectively made the human race go extinct. Standing atop the tallest mountain in the world, far from the bloodshed they had caused, the trio sat back-to-back in a triangle formation, lamenting the shattered timeline. Remember, we made a promise to Gigi that we would live normally in our next life. Naruto reminded his 2 lovers. The 2 in response simply nodded, seeming to rest a bit closer. They were tired, he knew, as was he. Not physically, though. Every time they reached the end of a timeline, they couldn't help but take in their deeds, good or bad. The regret they felt was there, letting them know whatever tiny part of them that was good was still there as well. Let mercy come, and wash away what I've done. Hinata whispered into the air. Naruto and Ino whispered the same, finding the lyrics comforting. They knew they deserved no mercy. No repenting could change what they had become. They could not let it go. They had already accepted it. But that didn't mean a part of them couldn't long for it. Are you guys ready? Ino asked before turning to sit Indian style facing the 2. The 2 simply moved into position as well. Let's enjoy the next life like Gigi wants. Even if it gets boring. Naruto joked, earning solemn chuckles from them. Hinata shed a tear. I love you both so much. I can't imagine going through this without you again. Ino and Naruto's mirth vanished as pain struck them. They all knew what Hinata felt. Before their grief could grow, Ino formed an odd hand sign. No sulking. Let's get to our next life so we can have even more fun. Naruto and Hinata nodded before forming a triple hand sign with Ino. The trio flashed through several more intricate hand signs, their chakra blaring to life around them in a vicious maelstrom. When they reached the final hand sign, all 3 called out, "Erase!" Their shout was followed by a blinding light that expanded from their conjoined hands, disintegrating their arms and bodies. Even after the trio were gone, the light continued, vaporizing the mountain they were on, wiping out the ground around it, expanding further and further until the entire planet was no more. He awoke to a familiar dark and dirty ceiling. The sound of a ceiling fan clicking on bad screws made him sigh in contentment. Twice in a row waking up at home. Glad I don't have Tsunade's luck. The blonde sat up and stretched, yawning and feeling his power still within him. The messy room was an immediate giveaway to him being in his younger body still. Without wasting time, he headed to his small living room and took a meditative position, failing to sense if anyone else was already within his home. Just as he was about to start collecting the memories of the current timeline, the Kyuubi made its presence known. Oh, key it. Naruto paled at the Kyuubi's voice. Oh fucking hell, he mumbled and entered his mindscape. As soon as his feet touched the ground, he found himself pulled into two large mounds of softness. He didn't even struggle, knowing he wasn't getting out of it so easily and didn't feel like expending the energy. Holding the blonde was a fair-skinned woman with red hair and fox ears, 9 red tails flowing behind her. She wore a black and red silk kimono that hung loosely off of her shoulders and showed her massive cleavage. Hee hee, guess what, kid? What? You just saved 15% on car insurance by switching to Geico? Nope, even better. The woman grabbed Naruto's hand and shoved it between her legs. The blonde finally started and jumped back immediately. God damn it, Kurama. That's still weird. This will never not be weird. Naruto cried, turning away to hide his blush and awakening manhood. The now female demon just giggled before appearing before the blonde and pulling him into her cleavage again. Oh, come off it. You know you like fucking me in this form. Yeah, but you're always so enthusiastic about it. It freaks me out. What about when you're a girl in some timelines? You didn't seem to have a problem letting Sasuke or Gaara. Shut up. I have bad judgment sometimes. Naruto blushed even brighter. He hated how even after so many lifetimes the Kyuubi could still get to him. In the rare few times where he or the girls swapped genders, they fell into their roles just like they usually did. Naruto never got over how being in a different role was way too easy and comfortable. In Kurama's case, she didn't understand why Naruto felt the way he did when he didn't care about gender in the first place. She figured it was because she was a demon, but they'd been down that road plenty of times. So maybe there was just something psychologically impairing the boy to accept such a trivial matter. In any case, it didn't even happen in every gender swap timeline either. It was Kurama's own personal little puzzle that she wanted to solve. Anyway, shouldn't you be finding out what type of timeline we're in? Kurama asked. Also, remember that one story Hinata read? The Journey to Yuzakage? Yes, to both of those. Why? Call me Kurumi. No. Why not? Naruto glared at the pouting demon and ignored her question with a blush. Acknowledging the effeminate name would just solidify the impending physical relationship that was bound to happen between the two in that specific timeline. He didn't need that type of headache this early into a loop. I'm going to get the memories now, so shut up and wait. Ino and Hinata probably did theirs already. Without awaiting the demon's response, Naruto left his mind. Sure enough, he could feel both girls making their way towards his apartment. He also felt a third presence close by, within his apartment. As he prepared to face the presence, the door to the apartment opened at the same time as his bathroom door. Onii-chan? Naruto? Naruto asked, his eyes wide. Onii-chan. The girl yelled and dashed at Naruto, tackling him to the ground with a hug. In the door, Ino and Hinata stood with knowing smirks, both of them holding in laughter. Naruto's bewildered and slightly panicked gaze only made their mirth grow. However, when Naruto's eyes opened and she saw the two standing in the doorway, the temperature dropped to 0. The looping trio felt an oppressive aura fill the room before Naruto stood and growled. How dare you show your face here, you bitch! With her words, a red aura flared around her. In the next instant, she launched a kunai at Ino's face. Naruto, Ino, and Hinata watched in slow motion as the kunai sailed through the air. To anyone else around and below special Jonin strength, the kunai would have been ridiculously fast. To them, it might as well have been not moving at all. In the infinite slowness of the blade traveling its distance towards Ino, Naruto and Hinata both looked at the platinum blonde. Ino rolled her eyes at the two. She knew what they were asking. They should have already known the answer though. So with a sigh, Ino let the kunai cut her cheek and she fell back theatrically. What the hell, Naruto? That was all Hinata and Naruto needed to know. They were going to fall into their roles of the timeline. Albeit, Naruto still didn't exactly know what his role was honestly. And Naruto-chan, stop. Ino-chan, I is here with me. Hinata stammered out and moved in front of the downed Ino. Naruto's rage turned to confusion, the red aura fading. Why would you bring her here? Hinata, I trusted you. Naruto cried out with both anger and betrayal in her voice. Naruto Imudo. Naruto spoke, immediately grabbing his counterpart's attention. She moved back into his embrace with a fluid familiarity. Her body froze up in the next moment, however, as Naruto pressed into the base of her skull and she froze in place. With Naruto in stasis and the shenanigans with the Kyuubi past, Naruto let out a deep sigh. With things finally calming down, he was able to gather his bearings. Ino stood with a huff and made her way over to her blonde lover, Hinata right on her heel. So I take it you didn't get a chance to gather your memories yet? Naruto shook his head in annoyance. Kurama's a girl. He muttered, the one statement being enough explanation for Hinata and Ino. Hinata giggled. You mean Kurumi-chan? Naruto shot Hinata a dirty look and groaned. Of course, Kurama, thanks to Hinata, officially Kurumi had already contacted the girls. Give me a second to catch up, please. The Jinchuriki passed his frozen sister to his lovers and took his meditative position. In an instant, the memories of their current timeline rushed into him. While it was rare for the trio to find a timeline that they didn't know backwards and forwards, it was even rarer to find a timeline with Naruto's twin, sometimes younger/older sister Naruto in it. She was a very welcome sight to any timeline the trio ended up in, which made it even worse when the trio planned on destroying a timeline. They held the girl in almost as high regard as they did each other. They still didn't understand why her existence was so sparingly encountered throughout their travels. Not nearly as rare as chaos, but they could at least guesstimate when it would appear. They could possibly end up in 3 timelines straight with the girl and then not see her for well over 400 years afterward. Generally, whenever the trio would find a timeline with the rambunctious blonde, whatever their plans were would switch to incorporate the girl somehow. As well, as far as they could remember, Naruto was the one and only existence that had always been on Naruto's side, no matter what. Even their own parents, Minato and Kushina, had been against the Jinchuriki in some timelines. This particular timeline was no different. Naruto paid rapt attention to the memories flooding him, knowing that he and the ladies would most likely be spending their entire physical lifespans in the timeline due to Naruto. The memories came in clear now. Starting from their birth, Naruto saw everything that was different. Due to Kushina having twins, Minato sealed the Kyuubi as halves within them both instead of himself. They were subject to a slightly modified speech of their parents' love to incorporate them both, though the parents' anguish was twice as bad as if it were simply Naruto alone. They were dying, knowing that they had sacrificed 2 children to the ire of the world instead of just one. From there, he saw something that made his stomach curl just a bit. Once everything was said and done, the Hokage ordered the children to be held in the psychiatric ward of the hospital. A modified padded room was turned into temporary nursery. The Hokage had very little contact with the children and the 2 were raised in the hospital until they were 3 years old. Naruto knew then and there the 3rd Hokage was not his Gigi in this timeline. A small pang of sorrow, but more so anger, flared inside him. The previous timeline had a version of Sarutobi that would have gone to war for Naruto. He wasn't sure when the next time he would see a version of his grandfather like that would be again. The guilt of having taken the life his own hands ate at him too, making it so his anger could only be pointed at himself. Once they were 3 years old, they were allowed entrance into the orphanage. The orphanage mother was a kind lady named Celica Mercury. Maybe one of the only kind things the Hokage had ever done for the duo, Hiruzen ensured Celica would treat the 2 fairly, just as she would any of her other children. The woman simply smiled at the Hokage and promised him she would go above and beyond for them. For 3 years, Naruto and Naruko knew what it felt like to have a mother. However, it was just 3 years inside of a new prison as the duo weren't allowed to leave the orphanage grounds either. They couldn't truly make friends with the other children either. Once they entered the orphanage, the adoption rate of the others went up exponentially. Naruto figured people were just trying to get the other children out of there before they could be corrupted by the demons. There were plenty of times where the only occupants of the orphanage were Celica and the Uzumaki twins. As such, she forged a bond with them as tight as she could with them being so young. As well, the 2 forged a bond with each other deeper than any Celica had seen before. She was murdered on their 6th birthday. Naruto and Naruko had insisted on going out and actually doing something for their birthday for the first time ever. As much as Celica didn't want to, she couldn't say no to her 2 favorite people. Within only an hour of being outside, Celica had known that leaving the orphanage was a mistake. She had escorted the blondes to Ichiraku's ramen stand, hoping that they wouldn't want to go to the main area of the festival. However, there were several people who went to the stand to eat ramen in remembrance of the late Yandane, an avid lover of ramen. The Ichiraku stand was destroyed for serving demons and Celica was forced to carry the children as she rushed back to the orphanage. Unfortunately, they only made it to the gates before they were caught. They were all beaten mercilessly, and unlike Naruto and Naruko, the auburn-haired woman did not have a healing factor. When the 2 recovered the following day, they were within their first cell within the hospital, where they would spend the next year in almost complete silence. They spoke to no one unless absolutely necessary, both aware that the death of their mother figure was their fault. Though he didn't tell them as such, Hiruzen did not deny their claims either. The 3rd Hokage finally did start overseeing the children, but it was never anything more than making sure that they had their basic needs met. For the life of them, either Uzumaki could understand if the old man cared about them or not. He reminded them constantly of Celica's sacrifice, saying that they needed to do their best for her. When they were 8 years old, the Hokage personally enrolled them in the Shinobi Academy, without asking them if they wanted to or not. He also did nothing to calm the fears of the civilians when they made claims of the demon twins attempting to regain their lost power. The beatings came far more frequently and resulted in multiple hospital visits for both blondes. The solidarity of the duo also grew as well. Where the twins were once inseparable, there was now an everlasting bond that could never be shaken. Naruto smiled. There was never a time where he and Naruko's relationship had never reached that point. A bigger turning point was Naruto and Naruko learning of the Kyuubi much sooner than usual. A particularly severe beating ended up putting both of them near death. They had awakened together in the link of their seals. They were between the 2 halves of the Kyuubi, both taunting them to rejoin them so they could destroy the world. The twins were almost tempted to do it if it weren't for a certain person calling out to them. Jiraiya of the Sannin was not happy when he found out exactly how his god-children had been being treated in the village. The 3rd Hokage himself felt traces of fear when Jiraiya declared he would bring forth the second coming of the Kyuubi with his own might on anyone he found responsible for their condition. And he meant anyone. Unfortunately, the third Hokage had placated him by telling him he would put forth more effort in ensuring the twins were treated fairly. Jiraiya was rightfully wary of his former sensei, but his loyalty to the leaf prevented him from acting on his suspicions. The Hokage also decided it was the right time to send Jiraiya on a SS long-term mission afterwards. The warning bells going off, Jiraiya knew something was up with Hiruzen. He requested at least 2 weeks to ensure that he would be prepared to be away from home for an extended period of time, which the third granted him. Jiraiya took it upon himself to teach Naruto and Naruto as much as he could before he had to leave, including how to control a small portion of the Kyuubi's chakra. After losing Celica, and now the only father figure they had, the blondes almost fell back into an endless silence. However, Jiraiya promised them he'd be back and begged them to hold back for the sake of something he had planned for when he returned. The Uzumaki twins agreed and fell back into their role as pariahs. 4 years later, the year of the academy graduation, things had seemed to have slipped into some form of peace. Hiruzen had done a lot more to protect the children, yet it was just an obligation to him at that point. They were still beaten on occasion. However, with the Hokage cracking down a bit harder, the civilians and some shinobi had to get creative on how to hurt the demons. The usual overpricing of items and refusing services increased as the beatings and physical harassment decreased. Some shinobi would use the twins' pranks as excuse for harsher than normal punishments as well. Through it all, the twins' reliance on each other and the promise that their father figure would return was the only thing that kept them going. In the academy, the two didn't really try to make friends. Unsurprisingly, Shikamaru approached them first, leading to a quick and somewhat awkward friendship. Chuji followed soon after. Oddly enough, Sasuke also gravitated towards the twins, feeling like they could understand him most after the Uchiha massacre. After several weeks of cutting through the twins' barriers, the small group was finally accepted by the Uzumaki. After a while, Shikamaru suggested Naruto get to know some girls her age as well. Naruto was of course hesitant, but with encouragement from Naruto, she approached the only other girl in class who seemed to have a brain, Hinata Hyuga. At first Hinata was wary of Naruto, as was the blonde of the Hyuga princess. For a while, their friendship was small talk and awkward glances. However, after learning of each other's past experiences, sans the revelation of the Kyuubi, the two girls forged a bond akin to the Uzumaki siblings. It wasn't as inviolable, but the two girls found comfort in each other that stemmed from a similar pain. Eventually Sakura and Ino noticed how close the small group had become, and realized they were their best ticket into getting closer to Sasuke. Sakura and Ino pretended to befriend Naruto and Hinata. This seemed to go well, Sakura eventually even finding herself really enjoying Naruto and Hinata's company. However, Ino was still only in it for Sasuke mainly. She didn't see why he was so interested in Naruto when everyone else shunned him and his sister. The few times she hung out with them all as a group, the twins seemed like normal kids. Or in her mother's words, unremarkable kids. So when her mother told Ino to stop pretending and to make a move on Sasuke, Ino didn't hesitate. Ino had caused a scene when it was only Naruto and Sasuke. They had been waiting for Sakura, Hinata, and Naruto to arrive. She chewed Naruto out about dragging Sasuke down along with their mediocre group. The scene drew people's attention and Naruto ended up running away. Naruto didn't have the memories of what happened between Sasuke and Ino after that. However, he was privy to the him of that timeline suffering one of the worst beatings he had ever seen within the past century. There seemed to be dedicated civilians that attacked him, instead of dozens of randoms. It seemed there was a split in the village in regard to him and sister, but they had no way of knowing why. Regardless, Naruto's memories stopped there. He was put into a coma. Coming out of his memories, the blonde let out a tired huff. He was angry of course, but more so because he wouldn't be able to simply find and kill the people that had hurt him. Living normally would mean they needed to keep as low a profile as possible until they could come up with a reason for why they had suddenly jumped in maturity and power. Ino Naruto started, but the platinum blonde shook her head. I know. I won't do anything for now. But if mom gets out of hand, Ino started only to shrink at the killing intent released by both Naruto and Hinata. You'll leave her be until we're ready to make changes. Naruto spoke coldly. Ino frowned. She knew Naruto was upset about what the her of that current timeline had done. But she was also positive he was upset that the Hokage of that timeline was nowhere near as supportive as the previous one. Naruto had killed the Hokage that he adored, just to end up with one whom they would probably let die during the sand/sound invasion. Ano, we should wake up Nachan and get her and Ino on good terms. Then we need to figure out how far we're going to go into this timeline. Hinata spoke up to bring a bit of the tension down. Though it was rare, she and her lovers did argue with each other. When they got really angry with each other, it could last more than one loop even. When Ino and Naruto argued, she felt whatever cohesion they had slipping, even if ever so slightly. She wouldn't be able to hang on to whatever little sanity she had left if the two people she cared about most weren't there to help her. Naruto's expression softened and he sighed. Sorry, Ino. Hinata's right. As he and the girls moved back into place, Naruto slowly fed chakra to Naruto, into the back of her skull and also to her stomach. He had to put the other half of Karamakura into stasis as well. Once they were all in position, Naruto started to move again, simply resuming her snuggling of her brother's chest. I think you two have some explaining to do. Naruto spoke to Ino and Hinata, pulling Naruko a bit closer. The two girls feigned frowns before entering Naruto and Naruko's apartment. Irika Yumino was pissed. Anyone who knew the man would tell you such an occurrence was rare, maybe even unheard of. Of course, people had seen the academy instructor get upset and maybe agitated. However, the continuous aura of absolute hatred that poured off the man for the past week was something many would only attribute to the nine-tailed demon. Everyone, from civilians to jonin, avoided the man as he moved through the village, leaking more killing intent than Anko when someone tried to take her dango. He was making his way to the Hokage's tower, his mood softening only a tad bit. Upon reaching the front desk, his eyes narrowed as he took in the shivering form of the secretary. Ayano, Yumino-sama. What brings you to the Hokage's office today? She asked, sweat pouring down her face. She fumbled with stacks of paper, looking everywhere but in the man's eyes. The woman could only function under the overwhelming pressure because of her position. Being in the Hokage's tower, she had felt plenty of killing intent, even from the Hokage himself. However, she couldn't fathom how an academy teacher was leaking more than the strongest man in the village. I have an appointment. Irika growled out. Alright, go on in. She called a bit too quickly. Just because she had a bit of tolerance to KI didn't mean she wanted to be subject to it for an adverse amount of time. Without any more acknowledgement, Irika moved up the stairs and entered the Hokage's office without even knocking. Sarutobi could feel the man's ire before he even entered the tower, and he knew exactly what it was about as well. Hokage-sama, Irika, I would advise you to settle down before we have any sort of conversation, lest you say or do something you will regret. The Hokage's countenance was serious. Irika growled in his throat but took a few moments to calm. The Sandaime was actually a bit put off by Irika's actions. The man was one of the few shinobi he held close that gave him the proper respect he deserved. To see the man lose his cool was a bit terrifying and pretty comical. His mirth was lost due to the reason for the academy instructor's visit though. It was undoubtedly about Naruto and Naruko need to be accepted into a family. They can't live alone after what happened last week. There it was. Sarutobi let out an audible sigh, taking out his pipe as he gathered his thoughts. This wasn't the first time Irika had come to the Hokage regarding the blonde twins. And Hiruzen knew, unfortunately for the man, that it wouldn't be the last time. As I've said before, Yumino-san, there is nothing we can do for Naruto and Naruko until they become actual shinobi. In just a few weeks, you saw what happened. They don't have time. Irika's voice shook the room, his voice resembling his very own big head jutsu. The Hokage's eyes took on a dark glare, but the academy teacher simply matched it with one of his own. Do you forget your place, Yumino-san? The Hokage asked, taking his pipe from his mouth. No. But did you forget the sacrifice made for those two children that you seemed so keen on abandoning? He spoke of both their parents as well as Celica. This is your final warning, Chunin Yumino. Watch your tongue. The Hokage flared his ki once more, but Irika merely flared his own. Yet, the Chunin teacher knew this is where their conversation ended. He didn't understand how the man he respected more than anyone in the village could be so callous when it came to his two technical wards. Irika was well aware of the twins' heritage, as well as their burden. They deserved so much more than they had, yet the Hokage seemed to sometimes go out of his way to ensure they received only the bare minimum. Again, it didn't seem as if the village leader hated them, but it was almost as if they were just expenses, commodities that needed to be kept in functioning, even if just barely. Order. Forgive me, Hokage-sama. If you'd excuse me, this was the last straw. This was the last time Irika would go to the Hokage. This was Hiruzen's last chance to do something for the Uzumaki twins. Now Irika would take matters into his own hands. The village be damned, he would be there for the blondes. Even if it meant going against everyone he used to call friends. Naruko didn't want to believe a word they were saying. She wanted to stay angry. She wanted to hurt someone for hurting her Oni-chan. The only person she would have been able to get away with hurting, maybe, was on her knees still, head bowed and apologizing. She wanted to summon a bit of the fuzzball's power and lay waste to the girl and the village, but her Oni-chan was too nice for his own good. And she knew she was as well. When Hinata explained how Ino had been coming to her over the past week and apologizing just as she was now, Naruko felt all of her emotions try to force their way out of her mouth in a string of expletives that would make a pirate blush. But another side of her, no doubt the side that her brother prevailed at more, just wanted to accept the girl's apology. She would have if it were herself that had been attacked. But it wasn't. Now her emotions were on the fence. She didn't forgive Ino, not by a long shot. Hinata said that she didn't forgive her just yet either, but she was willing to give her one last chance. During the whole conversation, Naruto hadn't spoken a word. He just observed the girls. She figured he was hanging back and getting his own thoughts together. Plus, Ino was more Naruko's friend was a word she would use sparingly now than Naruto's. What really stopped her from forgiving the girl was the fact that she had betrayed their trust. Sakura had pretty much come clean about wanting to be with Sasuke as the reason for getting to know them. She had even told them straight up that if Sasuke stopped hanging with them, she would as well. While Naruto did have a little resentment towards the Pinkette because of that, she also respected her for having the guts to tell the truth. Plus, while they couldn't technically be called friends, she was at least friendly towards them. Ino had been on her hands and knees for the past 15 minutes while they explained the situation. After a bit, she tuned out what was going on and decided to connect her mind to Hinata and Naruto, while the female Uzumaki decided her fate. I know we're going to be here for a while for Naruto-chan, but what should we try to accomplish while we're here? We can use a longevity jutsu to do the research we need to do, Ino suggested in her partner's minds. Hinata responded first. That would depend on if this timeline has the things we need, namely Orochimaru's more fucked up hideouts. Ino cursed in her mind. Shit. We're playing it by the book this time, so we can't just make our own labs, she sighed physically, making it seem like a sob as she was in front of Naruto. Well, we told Gigi we would live normally. But normal for us is anything but. We can make a few exceptions for the sake of research. Just nothing over the top. Naruto finally gave his input. We need to spend time in this timeline before we know how far we can go, though. Hinata wasn't keen on waiting. However, with the defeat against Chaos not even a full month behind them yet, she was more than willing to take time to prepare for their next encounter, however far away it may be. Naruto and Ino silently agreed with Hinata, not knowing what else they could discuss. They were still partially paying attention to Naruto as well. Until we can get away from Naruto, you two will have to deal with getting your power back slowly. Naruto added to continue the conversation. Or pad the chapter. I can tell Kurama's already started working on you both, Kurumi. Both Ino and Hinata thought back in unison. Naruto grit his teeth but didn't even bother refuting his princesses. By the way, where is Kurumi-chan? She's working on our bodies, but she hasn't said anything. Naruto paused for a moment before feeling the Kyuubi within his seal expelling a bit more chakra than was necessary to give Ino and Hinata their abilities. Naruto's own abilities were already back in order. It took far less time for the Kyuubi to realign its container's body and spirit than his partner's. It was the reason Naruto had created a sealing process to do what the Kyuubi could do, but much faster. He put two and two together and figured she was blocking the other half of herself from the conversation. But also knowing the Kyuubi, he was sure she was tormenting her other half as well. With the other half of her not able to physically affect the world, Kurumi was able to whatever she wanted within the seal. She probably would absorb her to save Tim at least, that's what Naruto hoped. If the other half, for whatever reason, let Naruto know what was going on too soon, it would cause problems. At least, problems in the sense that the trio were usually adamant on keeping their promises to people, even outside of each other. Not only did they still hold on to their words, their tattered nindo, but it also made the timelines less boring when they had to limit what they could do for a while. If things went south, or outside of their plans, they would have to break their promise to the previous timeline's sandame. But they would bear hell and back, literally, to ensure they didn't have to. Hey Kurama, while you're in there, start giving Nachan some power too. I want her to be able to fight Zabuza alone if she needs to. Naruto didn't expect a verbal response, and just as he figured, he felt more of the Kyuubi's chakra bleeding through Ino's mental link. The blonde shivered at the hot chakra, her body heating up in more ways than one. Hinata was feeling the same, but not as much. How long before we can fuck? Ino asked with no restraint. And who can we fuck? Hinata added, getting a sweat drop from Ino and Naruto. Naruto obviously. Naruto started. But if we're doing this by the books, then not officially until the Chunin exams. Anybody else you think can handle you is up to you, Ino and Hinata groaned. While they could have sex all they wanted before then, if the trio were to enter into one of their usual sessions with each other, they would be at it for several days. Plus, wherever they were wouldn't be standing when they were done. Ino suddenly sat up. Naruto and Hinata paid attention to Naruto again, seeing she was finally ready to talk. Look, you hurt my Oni-chan, and I can't forgive you for that. But if you're really trying to apologize for what happened, then if Oni-chan and Hinata-chan want to give you another chance, then I will as well. Ino gave a bright smile, one that wasn't forced. She was genuinely happy that she and Naruto could be on good terms sooner than later. It always hurt a bit that she was the one that had to work for Naruto's friendship, publicly at least, in most of the timelines they went to. Thank you, Naruto. I promise I won't hurt Naruto-kun ever again. Naruto rose an eyebrow at the affectionate address of her brother but said nothing of it. I know you won't. Because if you even seem like it, they'll never find your body. A pleasurable shiver went up Ino's back and she held back the urge to lick her lips. Naruto and Hinata sweat dropped. They generally forgot she was a sadomasochist. Before their blonde lover could jump his younger twin, Naruto stood up, picking up Naruto bridal style, getting a Hinata-esque squeak and blush from the girl. Well, now that that's out of the way, let's go celebrate Ino's second chance at Ichiraku's. The trio blinked when suddenly Naruto was standing at the door. What are you waiting for? Let's go! She yelled before leaving an afterimage as she vanished down the road. Oh Kami, she has a ramen addiction worse than ours. Ino called with dread. Naruto just smirked. He was going to enjoy this timeline indeed. She was antsy, which was generally common. At least, her fidgeting was usually attributed to her mousy and somewhat anxious personality. One couldn't blame her though. Being the assistant to a Kage-level shinobi suffering from PTSD and denial who seemed to be in a never-ending midlife crisis would make anyone fidgety. Shizen Kato, as she was known, walked through yet another random town with her mentor/best friend/ward in search of a place to sleep, a place to drink, and a place to blow their monthly savings. Their eternal visa to other countries helped to keep them deep within the distant storm country, ironically named due to its once-a-month storms that akin to hurricanes. The Jonin-level Kunoichi continued to fidget lightly, her head down and her thoughts far from the foreign countries she and her mentor found themselves in. Usually her behavior would go unnoticed by the buxom blonde alongside her. Unfortunately, as rare as it was, Tsunade actually was paying attention to the mousy brunette for once. Everything alright in there? You're not going to have another panic attack thinking of our dead, are you? Shizen jumped slightly. Taking only a moment to process what the blonde had said, she narrowed her eyes at her friend. I'll have a panic attack if you keep reminding me of our debt. She paused. Wait, I mean your debt. I don't owe anyone a damn thing. She admonished the Sannin. Tsunade's sweat dropped. Shizen never got snippy with her unless she was nervous or in a very bad mood. Seeing as they had been relatively calm for the past few hours, she assumed the younger medic was feeling anxious about something. Though there was no way for her to figure out what since the young woman always seemed to be worried about something. The blonde's sweat dropped again. Maybe she should let it go since she was most likely the reason she was anxious to begin with. Seeing that Tsunade was dropping the subject, Shizen let out a small sigh. She needed to get her thoughts together. It was of the utmost importance. Unbeknownst to the blonde Sannin, Shizen did far more not just for her, but for the world than she even realized. Ever since Tsunade had left the village of Konoha, dragging the brunette along with her, Shizen had been a spy, specifically one of Jiraiya's top spies. Jiraiya had approached Shizen several days before her leave. He had given Shizen time to help the woman grieve and knew for a fact that she wasn't going to get over the death of Dan and Nawiki anytime soon. He also knew his presence, as much as he hated to admit it, would not have helped the woman. Jiraiya loved her with all his heart, but he loved Naruto and Naruto just as much, if not more so. So while Tsunade was perfectly fine with leaving her godchildren behind, Jiraiya was preparing to give them enough love for the both of them. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned, as seeing as the Leaf Village did need more protection as it was still in its stages of recovery. It made Orochimaru's defection all the more untimely. Either way, Shizen agreed to look after Tsunade, though she wanted to stay behind for Naruto and Naruto's sake. But Jiraiya had known that Tsunade would never return to the village if she didn't have someone there for her that she could trust. Shizen was the only one. For the past few years, Shizen had only reported to other spies within Jiraiya's network, rarely getting any news from the Sannin about any changes in their plan. That was until 4 years ago. Jiraiya had appeared before Shizen herself, when she was out shopping. He informed her of what was happening to Naruto and Naruto back in the village. Shizen had wanted to drop everything and drag Tsunade back to the village right then and there. She wanted to tear Sarutobi a new asshole and burn the villagers alive. However, Jiraiya told her that he had a plan, one that wouldn't potentially lead to a civil war. As for Tsunade, he told her that she no longer deserved to be part of Naruto and Naruto's lives. While Jiraiya's hands were tied with him having to be away from the village, Tsunade had knowingly left the two and hadn't since thought of returning for their sake. Shizen wanted to argue that maybe hearing of their treatment would change the woman's mind. But she also knew it would compromise her position as Jiraiya's spy. After noticing the conflicting emotions of the kunoichi, Jiraiya decided to help her. He knew Tsunade wouldn't be happy to see him, but for one of his most loyal shinobi as well as his godchildren, he was willing to compromise a bit. Flashback. Shizen was worried. In a few moments, Jiraiya would be showing up at their hotel room to speak to Tsunade about the twins. She was worried because as much faith as she had in Tsunade, she honestly wasn't sure on how she was going to react to the news of Naruto and Naruto. Shizen herself needed to play the fool and act as if the news was actually new to her. Right on cue, a knock at the door grabbed her from her thoughts. Tsunade, in a bathrobe and sipping coffee, with a little spike of a pick-me-up, rose an eyebrow and looked to Shizen. Shizen moved to answer the door, as was per usual. She cracked the door, knowing who it was, and silently greeted the Toad Sannin. Their eyes shone understanding in the brief instance that they met. Jiraiya? What the hell are you doing here? How did you find me? Tsunade released a bit of ki, her fist clenched in annoyance. Jiraiya kept his arms folded and a small smirk on his face. He intentionally didn't hide the fact that he was looking Tsunade up and down, noting the blush on her face from both anger and embarrassment. It's good to see you too, Haim. You're just as elegant as always. The blonde Sannin subconsciously tightened her bathrobe. Shizen stifled a giggle at their antics but refrained from doing anything as she knew the situation would become serious soon enough. Cut the crap, you old pervert. If you're here to bring me back to Konoha, you and the old man can forget it. Jiraiya's smirk fell and Shizen held her breath. She knew what was coming next. I was right. You haven't heard. But then again, how could you? Tsunade quirked an eyebrow. Heard what? I was recently in Konoha, Haim. Our godchildren Naruto and Naruto. They aren't being seen as the heroes like they were supposed to. Tsunade visibly relaxed at that. Is that all? I thought you were going to say Sarutobi was dead or something. Shizen's heart sank. She had hoped hearing their names alone would put a fire under Tsunade. However, seeing her casually write them off caused a bit of her faith in the blonde woman to die. Jiraiya-sama, what's going on with Naruto and Naruto? She only asked because she saw the disappointment in Jiraiya's eyes. The small bit of hope she had left in Tsunade held out. She wasn't sure, but she hoped that hearing the full situation would change Tsunade's outlook. Jiraiya began to explain everything to the two, from the past beatings to his thoughts on Sarutobi only using them as power. Throughout the story, he could feel ki coming from both women, however, more so from Shizen. By the end of it, Tsunade sat quietly for a few minutes. They'll be genin eventually. Then they'll be able to protect themselves, Tsunade remarked. The air became stifling as Jiraiya stood up. Tsunade, I just explained to you that they need someone there, and I can't be. They may not make it to genin at the rate things are going. They're just about to start the academy. What do you expect me to do? To just get over Dan and Nawaki and go back to the Forsaken Village like nothing ever happened? Hearing her comment on Dan and Nawaki drove a dagger into Jiraiya's heart. He still loved Tsunade, and to hear the excuse that after all these years she was still grieving over her past love with no thought or care for anyone else made him realize how blind he was. He didn't care if she didn't love him, but to push aside Naruto and Naruto was unforgivable to him. The look of disgust in Jiraiya's eyes actually made Tsunade's heart skip a beat. He had never looked at her like that before. It was a look she had only seen on him when Orochimaru was brought up. For a moment, she wondered if things were really as bad as Jiraiya said back in the village. But it couldn't be true. She wouldn't admit it, but she had faith in Sarutobi to uphold the Fourth's wishes, especially since he knew they were his children. Besides, she just couldn't go back. The memories of Dan and Nawaki there were too much for her. Tsunade Jiraiya started, but both women could see his fist clenched. Instead of vocalizing anything else, he sighed and shook his head. A feeling of dread entered Shizen's stomach. When Jiraiya opened his eyes, they were cold. I'm sorry for bothering you. I'll be on my way. Not sparing a move, Jiraiya simply vanished in a swirl of leaves. Shizen's heart sank. When she looked to Tsunade, her faith withered to nothing. They'll understand. I can't go back, I just can't. She spoke, hoping to convince herself as well. Flashback end. That was 4 years ago, and Jiraiya had never shown up in front of the two again. For a while, Tsunade had entered a depression that honestly surprised Shizen. She cared about Jiraiya more than she let on, yet she cared about the memories of Dan and Nawaki more than anything else. She was tethered to the past, Shizen realized, and nothing short of a miracle could probably bring her into the present. Shizen knew the pain of losing her loved ones. Dan and Nawaki were her family. Yet she moved on. Why couldn't Tsunade? She had more family in Naruto and Naruto. You would think that the thought of losing people all over again would have made her want to actively prevent the past from repeating itself. Either way, they would end up back in Konoha before the end of the year. Jiraiya had kept in contact with her, and she knew what he had planned. 4 years in the making. Part of her was excited. She was looking forward to seeing the Uzumaki twins. She just hoped Tsunade would be on the right side when shit hit the fan. The second they entered the academy building, they felt a wave of ice-cold hatred wash over them. More specifically, it washed over Ino. The platinum blonde sweated for a second. Not in fear. Just at the thought that she would once again have to go about trying to earn people's respect and forgiveness. As Naruto, Hinata, and Naruto moved to their seats, Ino silently took in the looks. Shino was rigid, his hive buzzing fairly loudly in irritation at her presence. He wasn't close with the twins, but he liked them as people. Kiba glared at Ino, though his anger was far less than the others. He wasn't friends with the Uzumaki twins due to his mother, but as an Inuzuka, loyalty was everything. Chuji had stopped eating, a look of disappointment on his face. Shikamaru gave her a quick bored glance before laying his head down, deciding it would be too troublesome to acknowledge her existence. She knew that meant he was pissed. Sakura gave a sad look towards her friend/rival. She had wanted to warn Ino to actually try to be friends with everyone, or to at least be honest with why she was befriending them. But she was too late, and now she knew how the others would start treating her. Sasuke himself was leaking the most hatred. His eyes held hers with the most cold indifference that she had ever seen. A big part of Ino wanted to laugh. She honestly didn't give a shit about most of the looks, especially Sasuke's. But another part of her wanted to kick her own ass. It was always her. She couldn't believe how more often than not, she was a superficial little bitch in the loops. It agitated her, always trying to redeem herself in the timeline's wasted time they could have been using towards having fun or preparing for chaos. Take your seat, Yamanaka-san. Irika called from the front of the room. Ino flinched a bit at feeling a small amount of ki from the young teacher as well. Naruto had taken the seat next to Sasuke while Hinata and Naruto sat at the back of the classroom in a row by themselves. They motioned for Ino to join them so others could see that they had already forgiven her. She smiled sadly and slowly made her way to the back of the classroom. The looks and feeling of hatred wavered as everyone watched her sit between Naruto and Hinata. Irika frowned but ignored it. He started class just before Mizuki ran into the room late. Sorry I'm late. Forgot to get the written test for the pop quiz later. The class groaned at hearing about a pop quiz. Mizuki blushed sheepishly. Oops, well I guess it isn't a pop quiz anymore. Iruka just rolled his eyes, knowing Mizuki was playing the cool teacher by letting the kids know about the test. He also knew Mizuki was playing in regards to his loyalty too. Class continued as normal, and when lunch rolled around, as expected, Ino was swarmed. What the hell are you two doing with her? Sasuke growled out towards Naruto and Hinata. They were all preparing to leave the classroom but couldn't even get 3 steps before Sasuke, Shikamaru, Chuji, and Sakura had surrounded them. It's a long story, Sasuke-kun, Naruto started. So let's go get some food and we'll explain everything. The raven-haired teen grit his teeth but nodded anyway. The group found themselves on the roof of the academy. Naruto and Hinata were both silently chuckling at the annoyed air about Ino. They knew she just wanted to get past all the drama with her so they could move on to more important things. Naruto stood next to Ino with Naruto on her other side. Long story short, Ino apologized and we decided to give her one last chance. Even Nichan forgives her. She was a bit uncertain herself, still not completely okay with Ino. It was obvious the others were just as unconvinced. Because of her, Naruto ended up in a coma for almost a week. Why the hell would you even remotely forgive her? Sasuke spat. Naruto shook his head and took Ino's hand, much to everyone's shock. It wasn't Ino-chan who attacked me. I ran away knowing full well people were watching. I should have stayed with the group. Naruto, you can't blame yourself for what happened. Surprisingly, Sakura spoke up. It may not have been Ino that attacked you, but she is partially responsible. Ino glared at the pinkette. She hated that Sakura was actually speaking up for Naruto, and not trying to impress Sasuke at the moment. She had wanted an outlet for her irritation, but it wouldn't be Sakura apparently. Her agitation turned to pride though, seeing that Sakura would be a good friend when need be in the timeline. I'm not blaming myself. I'm blaming those bastard villagers. Unlike Ino, they won't ever regret their actions. Naruto looked down in sadness. I'm not saying to just forgive her right away, but at least give her one last chance. We've got to focus on becoming shinobi anyway. That's all that matters. The small group reluctantly agreed and things seemed to fall back into how they were before, albeit, with Ino generally being ignored. When class was over, the group decided to head to their respective homes to prepare for the graduation exam in a few days. Hinata and Ino also went to their own homes, only after walking Naruto and Naruto home. Of course the trio had a mental conversation, unbeknownst to their blonde ward. So first things first, even if we're living normally, we should probably manipulate the Hokage into placing Naruto on a team with one of us. Ino suggested. She should be with Naruto-kun obviously. We can just have him make a 4-man cell again. But what reason should we use this time? Wait, are we all not going to be on the same team? Naruto was a bit bummed. It was rare to have Naruto with them, so he wanted them all to be on a team. It would help with getting Naruto warmed up to Ino too. Hinata shook her head. It's been too long since we've actually gotten a chance to split up while we're young like this. If we don't want to waste any time, we need to cover more ground. Being in separate teams will make it easier to get the others on our side too, without having to manipulate them. Ino finished. Naruto sighed. He knew they had a point. But it seemed like 2 timelines in a row, and he was getting the short end of the stick. Ah, he's pouting. Shut up, Kurama. It's Kurumi. All 3 girls called. Whatever. What have you been doing this whole time anyway? Naruto huffed out. Having fun with my darker half. Kurumi giggled sadistically. The trio's sweat dropped. That laugh makes you sound like the dark half. Hinata deadpanned. Funny coming from a sadistic psycho killer. Taos. Hinata relented. The trio fell into a comfortable silence afterward, more worried about Naruto than the Kyuubi's own counterpart. By the time everyone had settled into their own homes, night had fallen. Naruto didn't speak to Naruto, which actually surprised him. She seemed to be lost in her own thoughts as she moved about their shared apartment with practiced ease. Naruto didn't want to encroach upon her thoughts, knowing that if it was something serious, Kurumi would let him know. Instead, he focused on spreading his chakra over the village. It was thin enough that not even the best sensor would be able to pick up on it. Naruto, however, would be able to pinpoint each and every person in the village. He lay on his bed with his eyes closed and hands behind his head, almost as if asleep. Soon enough, boredom went out and he really did fall asleep. With the beast within the belly, Kurumi was sitting atop a red and golden throne within a long throne room bathed in the same colors. Her kimono hung even more loosely from her lithe body as she sat with her legs folded and a long cigarette pipe in one hand. Please, Wani-sama, I swear I won't reveal your secrets to the braider, Naruko-sama. Below Kurumi, or literally, in the throne she sat on, was the other half of herself. This was possible due to the fact that the bottom part of the throne the powerful demon sat on was also made into a cage. Her other half looked almost exactly like herself, albeit, she was completely naked and her hair was unkempt. Kurumi didn't respond, instead, focusing on pouring more of her own power into Naruto through her connection with her lesser half. She was also seeing through Naruto's chakra bubble, subtly making a few changes to certain other genin as well, without Naruto's knowledge. She always liked to make things a bit fun for her 3 partners. Shikamaru was always a favorite of hers, and Kiba was an amazing shinobi in timelines where he didn't have his head up his ass. But for this timeline, she wanted to try something different. Tenten and Chuji. That should spice things up a bit. She paused. Damn it, Shikamaru's just too adorable not to power up. Always fun putting a little pep in his step. She wouldn't be doing anything too drastic to them, simply giving them a small power-up that they need to work for. She was also changing their outlooks just a tiny bit to get them to actually take their careers as shinobi far more seriously than they were supposed to. The Demoness could have also changed anyone around the world, just as her partners could as well, but it was still early in the loop. They were simply setting up the pawns at the moment. She needed to work faster than the trio as well, seeing as they always had a head start on what they wanted to do in the timelines. She had found a way to escape the seal without killing Naruto a while ago, but due to a lost bet over 1,000,000 years ago, she wasn't allowed to do it without Naruto's permission. So instead, she found a way to maximize her power while still sealed. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sobbing of her lesser half. With a sigh, Kurumi stood from her throne, stepping down and turning to face the irksome demon. Kurumi glared at the naked woman. Are you really that afraid to be erased? I'll just be absorbing you. You technically won't be dying. You're lying. You already have your other half. If you absorb me, you'll take all my chakra and I'll cease to exist. Kurumi had already told her about their time traveling. She had also played with her other half to the point where she had broken her within a matter of minutes. The thought brought a wicked smile to her face, which only made her lesser half shrink into herself even more. Flashback. After Naruto had left his mindscape, Kurumi immediately connected to the seal on Naruto. The wall that made up the opposite side of her cage turned into a perfect mirror of her own. The powerful aura of her other half swamped the area, though it wasn't even a light breeze to herself. As her presence registered to her lesser half, she couldn't help but grin wickedly. There was a pause as the lesser half eyed its counterpart. Why are you in the lowly form of a human? She boomed. It's repulsive. What is the meaning of this? Calm down, Kurama-chan. I'm just trying something new. You should too. You'd like being able to masturbate in this form. Trust me, you are different. I sense no hatred from you. What happened? Kurumi frowned and crossed her arms, putting a finger to her chin in thought. No hatred? That's not right. I hate a lot of things. Not being out of this damn seal. Snakes, oh definitely snakes. Oh. And Mondays. I seriously hate Mondays. The lesser half snarled and lashed out with her claws. How dare you mock me, you insignificant wretch? If we weren't locked away, I would absorb you and be done with your ilk. You speak as a human, a testament to being tainted by your pathetic container. The oppressive aura that swamped the dual cages made the beast form demon pause in something it hadn't felt in years. The fear that struck her made even her bones quiver. All of her bravado would have soon turned into insanity for feeling a being not only so much stronger than herself, but stronger than the sage of the 6 paths even. I was planning on enjoying my time here with you, seeing as it's rare enough to see a counterpart of myself within this damn travels. However, there are a few things that push my buttons. As she spoke, she had been walking slowly towards the bars of her cage. Once she reached them, she swiped an arm, destroying the bars completely, yet leaving the seal untouched. The beast-formed demon looked on in both utter shock and fear. She couldn't comprehend what was happening. It shouldn't have been possible. You believe yourself to be a timeless being, one having existed far longer than any human alive to this day. We Biju, beings of infinite knowledge and power. How laughable. Kurumi continued to walk slowly towards her counterpart's cage. The pressure she exuded was starting to weigh down on the large demon, making her plant her muzzle to the ground. Though it may not seem like it, we are susceptible to just as much as humans. Understand? That's to say, a crooked smile adorned her face, her eyes wide and shining. I'm just as insane as my lovers. Another swipe of her hand and the bars separating her from her counterpart vanished. So one of those things that pushes my buttons is anyone talking trash about any of my lovers. The pressure broke the floor around the weaker demon. She whimpered but was unable to open her mouth. Her bones began to audibly groan under the stress. I know you're ignorant to all of this. I could absorb you and then you'd realize what I'm talking about. But that just wouldn't be any fun. Ino-chan would have my tails if I didn't make you pay for what you just said about Naruto-kun. Hinata-chan would probably find a way to lobotomize me while having me keep my senses. She shivered at that one. She didn't put it past the little monster to already know of a way to do that. So for the sake of my own self-preservation, and partially just because I want to hear you scream, I'm gonna have to hurt ya. Kurama's eyes widened as Kurumi held up a hand. In the next instant, she felt something slide clean through her body, through her back, right through her spine. Finally the pressure abated and her maw flew open with a pained howl. Kurumi cocked her head to the side as she watched the glowing red blade of chakra impale her counterpart. She figured Kurama would last longer than that before showing pain. Perhaps she was being too harsh already? If you're wondering why that hurts so much, it's because it nullifies your immunity to the effects of your own chakra. Plus, you just had a big-ass blade shoved through you made of the corrosive chakra. A little mortifying to know that's the type of pain we cause to mortals, isn't it? She laughed to herself. Actually, it's a little ironic calling humans mortal. They have ways of prolonging their own lives or becoming immortal too. And we Biju are far from immortal. What are you? I'll kill you! Kurama shouted defiantly. Kurumi simply shook her head. With a flash of her eyes, 3 more blades rained down on the pinned fox, 2 more in her back and the last in one of her 9 tails. The howl of pain that erupted from her throat made Kurumi's eyes glaze in ecstasy. The sinister smirk that adorned her face seemed permanent. It's rude to interrupt your older sister when she's trying to teach you something. But if you want to keep showing me that amazing face of agony, be my guest. Her shouts continued as the corrosive chakra burned her from the inside out. Yet she knew she couldn't die like that. It was simply a way to inflict as much pain on her as possible. She wouldn't be able to fall unconscious either, she knew. It was impossible while still within the seal. Whoever this woman was, she was nothing short of a devil, a being with power so far beyond her own imagination that she would be a fool to antagonize her any longer. Now, as I was saying, Kurumi continued, we are far from immortal. Though it's extremely hard to kill us, it's still possible. When we're defeated in battle, yes, we reform later. However, if someone were to realize that we are closer to being spirits than demons, they'd know destroying our soul is the one way to completely ensure our destruction. Though I suppose the only one capable of pulling that off would be the Shinigami. Not that bullshit avatar the humans learned to summon either. By now, Kurama was reduced to a whimpering mess. The fear in her eyes let Kurumi know she was ready to cooperate. Go ahead and speak, warrior? The pain was still excruciating. Simply speaking those words were hard enough. Kurumi giggled sadistically before walking forward and petting her counterpart's snout. I'm you but stronger. That never got old to her. All you need to know is that this isn't my first rodeo, and anything you think you can do to get out of this situation is just going to make your time here so much worse. Kurama could sense the truth in her words. The pain she felt was something she wouldn't even wish on the bastard Uchihol. Maybe, now that you're willing to listen, there needs to be some changes here. First, you are to call me Wani-sama. 2. You are to refer to Naruto respectfully. 3. If you even hint at letting her know something is going on in here, I will make the pain you feel right now seem like a soak in a hot spring. To emphasize her point, Kurumi dispersed the chakra blades by having them explode inside of Kurama, making the beast temporarily black out for a few seconds. Once she regained her senses, the look in her eyes let Kurumi know she was in acceptance of her fate. Almost broken. Don't give me that look. I just had to make sure you were aware of the pecking order before we could continue being roommates. Flashback end. Anyway, you may as well get ready. I'm sure Naruto-kun is going to be bringing Nachan in here at any moment. Kurumi stretched before waving a hand and having the area return to its dual sewer prison state. She walked back behind her own bars before taking the form of her demonic self. Her other half silently went back into its own cage as well before reforming as the mighty Nine Tails. Owani-sama? The beat-down demon called. You're terrifying. Kurumi smirked, sending another shiver down her counterpart's spine. I know. The next few days passed with no incident at all. The trio fell into their roles perfectly, deciding it best to wait until they became genin to begin changing anything. Naruto and Naruto spent most of their time together hanging with Hinata and the others, generally talking about the upcoming exams. Ino had reduced her presence within the group, deciding to start getting into better graces with her parents, specifically her father. She knew her mother was still against Naruto, but her father was neutral. He didn't approve of Ino or her mother's attitudes towards the boy. She figured if she could show herself changing in front of him, he would eventually stick up for Naruto against her mother. It wasn't as easy as getting rid of her mother, but Naruto made it clear they wouldn't be killing anyone innocent. Hinata was both annoyed and happy that her father and younger sister were pretty much normal. Her father didn't hate her. He didn't physically abuse her or anything. He rarely even spoke ill to or of her. He simply seemed disappointed in her. By extension, he didn't praise Hanabi as being better than her elder sister either. If anything, he seemed more empty than anything else. She minutely wondered if it was a timeline where Hayashi just never got over the death of his wife and his brother. For the most part, she just didn't care enough to look yet. Her younger sister was almost the same way. Her previous memories showed that they were never close in that timeline. It was almost as if all of them had simply lost their will to do more than the essentials, even before the death of their mother. Hinata found solace that maybe there was something going on that could keep her interest within the clan without the need to cause havoc herself. She would never admit that she wanted her younger sister to smile either though. Finally, the day of the genin exam had arrived. While most of the students prepared themselves for the test, the trio discussed their plans for the upcoming few months. Have you decided how to tell her, Naruto-kun? Hinata asked. The trio had set up their genjutsu from the previous timeline, seeing that it would be weird for all three of them to simple sit silently while conversing within their minds. It was made easier by Naruto chatting with Sasuke and Shikamaru, leaving the trio to discuss what they needed, not really going to tell her outright. I'm going to scare her during the Mizuki incident. Ino and Hinata paled a bit. Really, Naruto-kun? Out of all the ways you're going to do that one? Naruto shrugged. She's already tougher in this timeline. She's a bit more independent already, and Karakurumi's made her even stronger already. She'll be able to handle this. Ino and Hinata frowned. Ino folded her arms and glared at her blonde counterpart. If she ends up hating you or getting seriously injured, I'm going to hurt you myself. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the Mind Walker. Is that a threat? It's a promise, Naruto. We said no hurting innocents, right? Who here is more innocent than Naruto-chan? Hinata flared just a tiny bit of her ki at the two, grabbing their attention. If you two still have some aggression you need to get out of your systems from the previous timeline, just go fuck somewhere. But this is the second time you two were starting to get at each other's throats over nothing. I'll be damned if I have to watch you two destroy each other again. Get over yourselves and remember who we're here for now. Seeing the steaming face of the Hyuga princess made both Ino and Naruto sweat drop. They looked at each other before falling into hysterics. The youngest Dimension Hopper pouted and her face turned even redder. What's so funny? She reverted back to her usual self in indignation. Hinata, you're so cute when you're trying to reprimand us. Naruto pulled the girl into an awkward hug, making her squirm. I'm not trying to be cute. She whined, which only made her two lovers dote over her even more. She relented and folded her arms while pouting. Ino poked Naruto's side and pulled on his arm. Hey, she's still right though. We really need to get over the last timeline. We're here now, and nothing is going too wrong just yet. I hate fighting you two, and there's no point in being at each other's throats right now. Naruto nodded with a sigh. Blame it on sexual frustration and chaos? Like always, Iruka and Mizuki entered the class soon after, and the trio dropped their jutsu. Everyone stayed seated where they were. Class, I know it's last minute seeing what today is, but we have a new student coming in that will be part of team placements if they pass their testing as well. He's a special case, but please be nice. You may enter Saishimura. A young Sai entered the classroom and Ino and Naruto couldn't help but look shocked. However, they both turned their attention to the diminutive Hyuga that was seemingly looking everywhere but at them. Hinata-chan, what did you do? Ino asked. What? I thought it'd be easier for what we're doing with the teams. Plus, I found out Sai and Danzo are different in this timeline. Different how? Hinata wagged her finger and stuck her tongue out. You'll see, the action only served to make Ino and Naruto once again hold in their squeals of how cute their Hinata was. The Hyuga heiress seemed to notice and blushed while looking away again. Things fell into a familiar pattern afterwards, with Iruka giving a small speech about their duties as shinobi and then the same test that they usually had to take. In the end, everyone that was important ended up passing, including Naruto and Naruko. After being dismissed for the day, Naruto pulled Naruko away from the group, letting Ino and Hinata route their friends away from the school. What's up, Nichan? Naruko leaned against the side of the building, a small blush on her cheeks. Naruto looked at his younger twin and observed her mannerisms. She made small glances at him, primarily gazing into his eyes before blushing and looking elsewhere. He smirked, knowing that it meant she already was leaning towards a more taboo mindset when it came to himself. He already knew they were close, but that next step was something that usually took time. That didn't seem like it would be the case here. That also meant she would be more accepting of the things he would tell and do to her, eventually. You remember what I told you about Mizuki-teen? He asked. Naruko's blush faded and a small frown formed on her face. It soon turned to annoyance, however. Yeah. I'm guessing that means he's probably going to try something today since it's right before we officially become genin. She sighed. We knew he was planning something against us. What do you think it will be though? It's why I sent the others away. I want to force him into a situation where he has to make a move. Let's go look miserable somewhere and wait for him to pop up. Naruto suggested with a sly smirk. His twin returned the gesture, and the two shined to the top of the school building, looking towards the sun in melancholy. With them both being admittedly stronger than some genin, even before the Naruto's appearance within the timeline, they had also been more observant. Naruko had been the first to notice Mizuki's false attitude towards the twins, alerting her brother of it several months prior. When Naruto arrived in the timeline, he made up assumptions that Mizuki would eventually do something to harm the twins, though it would be more subtle than outright attacking them. Naruko agreed that it was plausible, and the two simply kept an eye on the man from then on. Not too long after most of the students had went home did the silver-haired Chunin appear before the blonde twins. Hey you two, what are you doing up here? Shouldn't you be out with your friends celebrating? He asked. The twins gave false smiles, but played up their sadness. Naruko even looked away to force a tear out. Well, everyone else had family that they needed to get back to. Me and Naruko only have each other, so didn't really want to impose on anyone. Oh, I am sorry. Mizuki looked genuinely sad for the two, though they both know he was laying on the cheese stick. They both held back, wanting to rip into him as he laid a hand on both of their shoulders. Hey, you know what? Forget the others. How about I do something special for you too? Just between us three? Now it was the twins' turns to lay it on. Both blondes looked up at Mizuki with shining eyes and hopeful gazes. Really, Mizuki-sensei? Yeah, but it'll just be between us. I don't want anyone to think I'm playing favorites, though you two always were the best to me. He winked and kept from falling over in laughter as he saw the sheepish blushes on the dual Jinchuriki's faces. What are we gonna be doing, Mizuki-sensei? Naruto asked. The silver-haired Chunin shook his head. It's a secret. Instead, just meet me at the small house just outside of the southeast exit to the village. He gave them the direct coordinates as well. Be there at about 9 p.m. Don't be late. With his words, he patted them on the head again and vanished in small whirlwind. When they were sure the Chunin was gone, they both looked at each other with deadpan gazes. He's totally going to try and kill us. Naruto called. Definitely. Want to go tell the Hokage? Naruto asked, though he knew the answer. Seeing the grimace on his younger twin's face confirmed her answer, as if we could do it by ourselves. Or at least let Iruka-sensei know. Naruto paused for a second. Generally, he would agree with going to tell Iruka. However, this was one of the rare few times where Mizuki didn't want him, her, or them both to steal the forbidden scroll. So there would be no need to raise alarms in the village, meaning Iruka wouldn't need to come after them. He wouldn't need to be put in danger if something did end up happening. Whatever was waiting for them in the forest could be dealt with between just the two of them anyway. Nah. Let's kick Mizuki team's ass first. Naruto shrugged but smirked anyway. She grinned before moving swiftly and jumping on Naruto's back. In the meantime, mush Oanai-chan. To Ichiraku's, Naruto scoffed in good nature at his sister. Better hold on then. He called back slyly before seemingly vanishing. The only sound heard were the terrified and girlish squeals of Naruto. She was bored. It was bound to happen eventually, but she had hoped she could hold off until they were assigned teams. Unfortunately, not being able to kill anyone, fuck anyone, or cause general mischief had finally taken its toll on her. The Yamanaka heiress looked towards the forest with glowing eyes, watching her counterpart blonde, as well as his sister. It was another shared technique of the looping trio, being far sight. It could literally be classified as a Dijitsu, seeing as it could do everything both the Byakugan and the Sharingan could do, plus a bit more. They were even debating whether or not to give it the abilities of the Rinnegan, but decided it would be a waste of their time. Irony. Ino sighed and flopped back on her bed. She had seen the Mizuki battle so many times, even new takes on it didn't really interest her. She knew Naruto and Naruto would most likely end up killing the man anyway, so she would just wait to hear from them the following morning. On her end, she had already spoken with her father about the recent happenings with her fellow classmates. Needless to say, he had been quite livid with her and her mother, and the argument the elder Yamanaka couple entered made Ino upset. She excused herself to her room where her father told her to stay for the night. Ino only listened because she wasn't technically a legal kunoichi yet. The minute she was placed on a genin team and passed their tests, however, she would pack her stuff and move in with Naruto and Naruto. Wait a minute, Ino suddenly shot up and slapped her forehead. How could I have missed that? She whisper-shouted to herself. The girl sat on her bed Indian style before entering an instant meditation. She began to go over things that happened in the previous timeline, but tried to focus on a particular memory. Haze, at least promise me this. Hiruzen started. Naruto, Ino, and Hinata looked up, already knowing what he was going to ask. He let out an exasperated chuckle. Whatever my word means to you three, in your next life, live normally. Please, Haze. Ino locked the memory in her mind and brought it to the forefront of her thoughts. With a smirk, she exited her own mind and began to stretch. He told us to live normally. He never said to be good, or to not hurt anyone. Normal for us is so much more extraordinary than for anyone else. That means we promised the Hokage we would be ourselves. We never promised to be good. Her smirk turned into a sinister smile. Fuck, I love loopholes. With that thought in mind, she wished they could find the time to unlock their full potential. Letting Kurumi slowly feed them their energy without the sealing ritual was tedious and took far too long. With as strong as they all were, it would probably take another few weeks or perhaps even months before they were at full strength again. So far, she could feel that she was barely stronger than Tsunade at that point. To her, that was the equivalent of a sick and dying newborn baby. People like Jiraiya and a few members of Akatsuki would still be able to defeat her and her lovers at the moment. Her frustration didn't last, however. Her mind drifted to the team placements. She had figured out what Hinata was doing by bringing Sai in early, though she didn't know what was supposed to be different with him and Danzo. She hoped that she'd still be with Shikamaru and Shuji. It was rare for her not to be, so she wasn't too worried. But the extra pieces Hinata was adding had her a bit nervous. Speaking of my little Heim, Ino's thoughts trailed off as she looked in the direction of the Hyuga compound, making her eyes glow again. She could clearly see Hinata bathing with her younger sister, washing the smaller girl's back and hair. A content smile was on her face and Ino felt the same contentedness envelop her. Hinata was happy to be with her little sister, something she had a generally hard time admitting. Ino smiled wickedly as Hinata began to tickle Hanabi, much to the younger Hyuga's shock. Ino took a mental video of the moment for blackmail material. Enjoying yourself, Tsukihime? Ino projected her mind into Hinata. Hinata squeaked and blushed a magnificent shade of red as she knew she was caught playing with her sister. Are you okay, Nei-chan? Hanabi asked as she looked at her sister curiously. Hinata just smiled warmly and continued to wash her hair. I am fine, Namuto. I just gotta chill. Hanabi shrugged and turned around to let her sister continue taking care of her. It was the happiest she had been as far as she could remember, and didn't want to look a gift horse in its mouth. Any time spent with her elder sister would be precious to her. Ino-chan, stop being a pervert, Hinata admonished. What? I was just trying to see what you were up to tonight, and if you were available to chat. There's a few things I wanted to tell you, and they couldn't wait until I wasn't in the bath, or with my little sister? Hinata deadpanned in her mind, making Ino chuckle sheepishly. I swear I didn't know you two were in the bath. But I couldn't look away when I saw how happy you were. It made me feel happy too. Hinata smiled sadly before finishing up with Hanabi. She told the younger girl to get dressed for bed while she finished washing herself. So what did you want to tell me? Did something happen with Naruto-kun and Naruko-chan? No, they're on their way to meet with Mizuki right now. But I did remember something that I think you're going to like. Ino replayed the memory of the previous timeline's Saname speaking to them before he passed on. After the short memory, Hinata was silent for a moment. Naruto-kun's not going to like this, Ino scoffed. He doesn't have to like it. He agreed to it. Sarutobiji didn't tell us to be good. He told us to live normally. And normal for us is anything but, I know. But for Naruto-kun, he will see it as you just doing your best to cause trouble. Ino frowned a bit. Her and Naruto tended to get into it a bit more lately because of her growing need to cause destruction. It was something that only started about 400 years ago, but the defeat by Chaos 2 timelines ago made her itch grow. For a moment, Ino realized she needed to calm down. Maybe falling into her role within that world would help, but there was no guarantee. Maybe I am. But it's not against our promise either. I don't want to cause trouble here much. But I want to have more freedom too. Naruto's starting to treat me like a child. Hinata sighed, knowing what Ino was saying. The more Ino tried to act out in her own way, the more Naruto seemed to scold her as if she were his daughter instead of his lover. Hinata wasn't entirely sure why or when it started happening, but it definitely put a bit of distance between the two blondes. It was nothing substantial at the moment, but she knew if they continued as they were, it would be just like before. Maybe when you bring this up to him, you both should talk about what you're feeling. Try to explain to him what you've been going through lately. You know Naruto-kun would understand. Ino nodded. Even though she had the makings of complete and utter trust in all of her lovers, there was still some apprehension of mistrust. It was generally due to whatever part of a timeline they were in. Being in their younger bodies made her anxiety a bit higher, and with her past self not completely restored, she was still being affected by the emotions of her present timeline. Anyway, enough of the moping. Want to go get a late-night snack? Pretty sure we can break into the bakery for some cinnamon rolls. A knock on Ino's window actually made her jump. She hadn't even noticed Hinata literally vamp from her sight until she looked outside to see the Hyuga princess beckoning her to come. She held back a giggle at the glazed look in the dark-haired beauty's eyes, her mouth salivating already. I better go before she breaks my window and drags me. He had went over all the different possibilities of how to get Naruto jump-started into the life he and the others were going to build. At first, he planned on using the Kyuubi to scare her, but realized Ino was right. There was a better way to do it. However, it would end up being worse than the original idea. It would definitely put the girl in danger, something that made his stomach coil the more he thought about it. You okay, Anai-chan? Naruko asked as she walked hand in hand with her brother towards where they were supposed to meet Mizuki. Her sapphire eyes peered into his own with actual worry. It made him feel even worse for what he had planned now. He would be sure to make it up to her afterward. She was their world, and he'd be damned if anything permanent happened to her, mentally or physically. I'm fine. Just wondering how I got such an adorable Emuto all to myself. Naruko almost tripped in her step, her face burning so red one could confuse her for the original Hinata. Her hand slipped from her brother's grasp, much to his chagrin. What are you saying? Don't be weird, Baka. She turned from her brother, pushing the tips of her fingers together. Someone's tsundere. Lies. Naruko shouted before jumping onto her brother with an unexpected hug, knocking them both down. Naruto's sweat dropped but had to stifle his giggles at his younger counterpart's puffed-up cheeks. Did I strike a nerve? That's a taboo, Oni-chan. Tsunderes are terrible creatures only fit for the worst parts of hell. Naruto's brain paused for a moment. Only the uproarious sound of Kurumi laughing her ass off in his mind brought him back to reality. Na-chan, I was only joking. No! Tsunderes are little demons just waiting to rip out the heart of honorable and loving people who only want to see them happy. They're monsters who don't even deserve romance, even if they try to be cute sometimes. How did we even get on this topic? Naruto wondered as he could feel the passion of Naruko's words. Okay. You're not tsundere. Can you get off now? A sly smirk found its way onto Naruko's face. Naruto's brain paused again. Oh, you know what? I can prove I'm not tsundere right now, Oni-chan. The twin-tailed blonde leaned up, straddling her brother's waist. Luckily for them, they were already in the forest headed towards where Mizuki wanted to meet up, so no one was around to see the compromising position. Emutami, dear sweet little sister, what are you doing? The older Jinchuriki was honestly a little nervous. None of his previous memories of the timeline showed Naruko being bold enough to take that next step in their taboo relationship. Nothing had happened recently, that he knew of, that would make her act this way either. On her part, Naruko simply put her hands on Naruto's chest before wiggling her hips a bit, slowly grinding on her brother through his clothes. A jolt went through them both. Naruto stifled a groan of pleasure, not sure if he should let this go on. I'm not naive, Oni-chan. I see how you look at me sometimes. I know you've seen me look at you the same way. She continued to grind slowly as she spoke. Her cheeks began to flush pink, and she let out small moans, making Naruto harden beneath her. See? You're being more honest now too. A haze of lust began to form over Naruto. He could only take in the form of the girl atop him as his mind began to slip. She wore a more feminine version of his orange outfit, the jacket being short-sleeved and having a low cut for the chest area. It showed a decent amount of cleavage. It worked seeing as Naruko was the second most developed girl in their class, only losing out to Hinata. Her skin was flushed with her own arousal, his eyes lingering on her slightly pouty lips. Her hips were developing just as fast as her. She was almost as thick as Kurenai already. Naruto couldn't fathom how she looked even sexier than his sexy jutsu. The male Jinchuriki subconsciously gripped his sister's hips as she began to grind on him harder, kneading her softly as his own hips involuntarily pushed back against her motion. His member throbbed painfully against his pants, and hurt with pleasure every time Naruko pushed herself down onto it as he pushed upwards. A wetness soaked through to his package, letting him know Naruko was just as turned on as himself. We can have some fun now, right, Oni-chan? Naruko leaned forward, her twin tails falling to both sides of Naruto's face as she brushed her nose up against his. His face was just as red as hers, and the lust that was building between them seemed to create a heat haze around them, a sparkle of crimson in her eyes locking into his own sapphire orbs. Wait a minute, son of Kurumi. Stop it! Naruto shouted in his mind. Naruko's face suddenly pouted and she sat up with a huff. Ah, you figured it out. Naruko's voice was a mix of her own and Kurumi's. Her eyes flashed red completely, showing that it was indeed Kurumi possessing Naruko's body at the moment. She had gotten close enough for Naruto to see the glow in her irises. What the hell were you trying to pull? If this had gone on, I could have hurt Na-chan. Naruto did his best to keep from yelling. I wouldn't have let it go that far. Relax, I was just making a memory for Na-chan to daydream about. Naruto moved his sister's body from atop him and pulled her up. He made sure they were in the same walking position as before Kurumi's little prank. I already have a plan to get Na-chan over that boundary. I don't need you interfering. A scoff came from inside his mind. Naruto looked to his counterpart to see her in a daze, her eyes partially glazed over. Kurumi had released her. Oh fine. Be that way. But I bet you and Na-chan get it on before the end of the night because of me. The blonde waited a few moments to let his arousal fade before snapping his fingers in front of his sibling's face. The girl flinched a bit and looked around. Huh? What happened? She blushed a bit at feeling the wetness between her legs and tried to hide the stain that was surely there. You started mumbling about how you were going to prove that you weren't at Sundara and then you spaced out for a bit. Everything alright? He couldn't help but smirk as the blush on her face returned anew, setting her aglow. Let's just get to this meeting with Mizuki team. She took off into a sprint. Oh Kami, I was picturing myself doing THA with Oni-chan. In front of Oni-chan, it wasn't the first time Naruko had daydreamed of her and her brother like that. Hell, her dreams were so wet when it came to her brother, it made the land of waves seem like a desert. It didn't help that she was almost positive her brother felt some way towards her as well. With a shake of her head, she decided to concentrate on the task at hand. Naruto could still smell her arousal on her, surprised that it seemed to be growing. Maybe he should thank Kurumi after all. Damn straight.